No rolling. So good morning. It's my pleasure to call to order the 10 a.m. regular PSVS meeting of April 18th, 2024. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chair Ortiz.
Here.
Committee Member Abernathy. Here. Committee Member Dewey.
Here.
Committee Member Coman.
Here. Here.
Committee Member Madland. Here. Committee Member Perez Andreessen. Committee Member Prince.
Here.
Committee Member Campbell.
Here.
And Committee Member Rojas Mora. Here.
Thank you. Next item, please, Madam Clerk.
Public comments.
Okay. All right. Statements for items listed on today's agenda are given a 2-minute time limit, 20 minutes total per agenda item. If you have written comments that are longer than your verbal statement, give them to the clerk, who will give copies to the committee. If you're here to make a public statement, please fill out a public speaker card and hand it to the city clerk. You can find them in the back of the room. Madam Clerk, do we have any speaker cards?
Chair Ortiz, we have not received any speaker cards for items listed on today's agenda, nor have we received speaker cards for items not listed on today's agenda.
Okay.
I did, however, provide a staff report or staff memorandum transmitting correspondence received.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. All right. Next item, please.
Adoption of the April 27, 2023 special meeting minutes.
All right. So the minutes are in your packet. I believe they were distributed with our packet electronically as well. So do I have a motion for approval of the minutes as presented by the city clerk?
I'll make a motion to accept.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion and a second.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, please conduct the vote. I believe we're going to be doing it electronically today.
Can't vote yes and no.
Exactly, yes. Smoke would come out.
You gotta vote there and then submit.
We'll get trained. We'll, real-time training here.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Perez Andreessen absent.
All right. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
New business, item 4A, Public Safety and Vital Services, PSVS, Summary, New Positions and Strategic Initiatives Overview for Fiscal Year 24-25.
All right. I will turn to our city manager, Mr. Clegg.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Good to be back together again. In particular, it's been a while because we didn't have any mid-year actions. We took all of our mid-year surpluses and put them in the bank. Didn't have any recommendations on spending, and so this is the first time we've been together in some time. What we're going to do today is go over an overarching overview first. Then we will have a presentation from the police department, and then we'll have a presentation from Parks. You'll note from your packet that the recommendations are more meager than they have been in past years because we're just being conscientious about our resources. After a second year of very stagnant revenues, we continue to see, some constriction in the budget. But we will still have a presentation from Public Works next week. But other items that are a little bit more miscellaneous, I'll cover those today and be able to do, again, more Q&A next week as well. But with that, I will jump into our presentation with the overview. Just again, we always ground ourselves in the City Council goals and priorities being related to these 5 areas. And of course, the mandate for this group is to look at whether items are consistent with these 13 measure priorities. For the overview, again, the role of the committee is to, of course, have these public meetings so that there can be comment, presentations can be made public. I would note that despite not seeing a large crowd this morning, there's value in the public record that individuals can go and look at these materials, both the administrative reports as well as the presentations themselves. And then again, recommendations on funding priorities, whether the items are consistent with the 13 priorities, and ultimately that is valuable information for the council in adopting the final budget. So our budget summary for this year, we are focusing in particular on essential services and making sure that those are maintained. We're continuing to set aside reserves and contingencies. As I noted, this is a second year of economic stagnation. It was curious to see in 2020 and 2021 that we actually saw the economy perform a little bit better than expected, but it was always anticipated that there would be slowdowns, and we've seen that now a second year in a row. For those revenues that are available, it's much more focused on one-time projects, very limited ongoing is being proposed. And again, would note that the general fund is challenged with overall costs. What we're seeing is the regular cost of doing business, the same service level is costing us much more. And so that just means we have less discretion to make any additions because it's simply just costing us more to do the same. And that means, again, as noted in the middle there, that our expenses growth is higher than our revenue growth, and that would be unsustainable indefinitely. And so we're very cautious that we have made some adjustments in the budget, which I'll go over a little bit later in a little bit more depth. But we have looked for reductions in the budget to offset, some of these ongoing costs. But we have to be careful. The good news is, though, that the tax that was $100 million, about 101 last year, modest growth. We're looking at $103 million tax in this coming year. Gives us the opportunity to do some strategic initiatives through the PSVS funding, but has to be very, again, limited and prioritized. So you'll see in this meeting, in the coming meeting, about $21 million in items that we are going to bring forward to the City Council, ultimately for consideration in the budget, and that we bring to this committee to determine, again, if it's consistent with those 13 priorities. And again, you'll see a narrowing of the focus. The biggest portion is on safety and resilience. That means public safety, policing, and homelessness. We're also looking at street infrastructure, and you'll see that there's a little bit of a shift in emphasis there this year compared to other years in its proportion of the recommended budget. And then still around some of the quality of life, that really means parks, and we'll get into that in a minute, but continued investments in our regional and local parks. So as it relates to personnel, we, in the first few years of Measure N, we saw significant growth in policing. We created an economic development department. We added code enforcement for quality of life, rapid response teams, park rangers. At this stage, we are finding that, or not just finding, but doing the analysis that we need to be very limited in any additional ongoing because of that potential growth, even in the ongoing, as well as just leaving that 20 to 30% of the PSVS available for strategic priorities, one-time projects, and the like. But we have just a handful of positions here, again, compared to prior years, much smaller, and related to one high priority and one urgent need. The high priority is the Community Vitality Call Center. What that really means is this is a command center that addresses our homeless encampments. And we filter all of our different teams now through one call center. We had, over time, created 4 or 5 different teams that are addressing whether it's outreach, or the noticing to vacate encampments or enforcing encampments, then also cleaning up encampments. And as we incrementally added all of those teams, we didn't necessarily have them all coordinated through one set of supervision. We've, in this last year, found a way to patch it together with some of our existing resources, but the ability to now give direction to all those teams through one coordinated approach, and also take requests from council members and community and city staff and funnel that all through one coordinated input and output. Much more effective, better use of our resources, and also a better handle on understanding where the issues are. So for the most part, we've done that with existing resources by pulling people from departments into this new unit as a call center. But our ability to take calls at sort of additional hours and consistently across all days has been challenged. And so these are two entry-level call takers that would help be able to respond to encampment notices, again, from community and council and others, to make sure that we continue to respond quickly. We've been in a 48 to 72-hour response time frame, and we don't want that to slip. Shifting gears to the police department, we have 7 positions here, and each of these has been looked at carefully for its strategic nature. I'll let Chief speak a little bit more to this. There is some focus on a couple positions on our response times, and a little bit about enhanced engagement, but the biggest priority here is actually being responsive to our need to be able to have the command staff that can address core duties, and in particular the stipulated judgment that we have. We need a certain amount of command staff providing oversight within the categories that are being expected now of us under the stipulated judgment. And so we've looked at civilian roles that can be transitioned, or excuse me, sworn roles that can be really transitioned to civilian individuals that are probably actually better suited to those types of duties than the rotating command staff, and that returns sergeants, lieutenants to the sworn force to be able to provide that level of oversight required through our stipulated judgment. And again, Chief can wade into that a little bit further. Overall, though, you're looking at less than $1 million in new ongoing costs, and a little bit of one-time setup for some of these positions. We distinguish recurring operating funds from the ongoing as those funds that could be reduced if we saw priorities change or budgets constrict. And we have a few adds, again, highly prioritized towards safety and homelessness in this space that are operating funds. So I mentioned this call center. It didn't have really an operating budget. Pretty meager to put just $50,000 together to make sure we can, pay the utilities and keep the lights on for that team. We also, though, have noted this is some interesting data. We did a deep study of individuals in the downtown core who were being regularly interacted with by multiple city teams. So our code enforcement, our cleanup crews, and in particular our police impact team. So police has a dedicated unit for quality of life type issues, and a vast majority of their work is done in downtown with individuals experiencing homelessness. And we found that there were 11 individuals who were taking up close to half of the time of our police unit and our other teams. Just 11 individuals. We're getting smarter about the data and how we can respond to some of these chronic issues. And so I'm going to be proposing to this committee and the council that we create an intensive case management team that focuses just on those highest frequency individuals. We feel like that's actually a much lower dollar amount than the cost it's having on all these teams to be working with those individuals week after week, month after month. If we can focus on them and create a different outcome for that small number of high volume individuals, we feel like that's going to be a much more efficient use of our resources. And then lastly, some resources for that team to be able to provide client services. Those are the second and third line items up on the screen right now. The fourth one is the big ticket item, that is additional emergency shelter capacity. We've received referrals from the City Council to look at expanding our Brundage Lane Navigation Center number of beds, as well as to look at potential safe camp options, much like the county has at M Street Navigation Center. And so we've created a set aside to create more of those beds. On a weekly basis, we have 50 to 60 individuals on a wait list to go into the Brundage Lane Navigation Center. And we know for the community, there's sort of a level of frustration in individuals that are not accepting services. But if we have 50 to 60 every week that are saying, I would go if there was a space, that's obviously something to note, and those would be 50 to 60 individuals not on the streets. I'm going to pause really quickly because we're not seeing another presentation specific to homelessness later today, and just say two things about homelessness for the benefit of the committee. We continue to work on homelessness with three core assumptions. The first assumption is that it is not entirely the city's responsibility to address homelessness in the region, that we need to continue to work with our partners and push our partners to provide the services for which they're responsible. There are certain aspects that are, again, very frustrating to our community, and this is issue number one, and we have to continue to push and do more to be responsive to the quality of life that our community members are looking for. Second assumption is that unless we address some of the underlying system issues that are coming from state policy, as well as just some of the realities of our state mental health and regional criminal justice systems, unless we address some of those system fixes, we're never going to solve this problem. It's not going to happen just by the city introducing some new programs and services. We have to make system changes to really get at the issue of homelessness. But in the meantime, we have to do as much as we can. And then the third piece, or a third assumption that we're making, is that very specifically we have to have more beds and programs available to individuals experiencing mental health challenges. And we have to address criminal justice in different ways because, as we've noted before, we have enough officers now through the Public Safety Vital Services tax that we can make arrests all day long, but there's no place for folks to go. Simple. We have no place for them to be held accountable. And we need jail beds for those that have broken the law, and we need services for those that need to have a place where they can either rehab or detox or get into programs where they can make some of the changes that we'd like to see for their own personal outcomes as well as for community outcomes. But without those two additions, it doesn't matter how much policing we do if there's nowhere for folks to go. I will shift now back to the presentation, and that last item up there, we've continued to add technology and video surveillance and other automated reporting systems like our ShotSpotter for gunshots. We're using drones. We're at the tipping point where it makes much more sense to create one central location in the police department that is receiving and reviewing all of that information. And that's what we're calling a real-time information center. I'll let Chief speak to that a little bit more. There are some one-time costs to set that up, but there are some ongoing software costs to continue those operations. So if you look at this, about $2.4 million, and the less than $1 million, it's just under $3.4 million in ongoing or operating funds that are being recommended. In just good management principles, I was not comfortable taking a recommendation to the City Council for increases in ongoing unless we made significant decreases in ongoing. So it was in your packets, but I'll just note really quickly for the record that we identified $3.2 million of operating costs that were not staff ongoing costs, but they were operating costs that were being contributed into, like our economic opportunity areas into some of our economic development programs and small business assistance, as well as some of our community revitalization programs. We were fortunate to be able to do that work in prior years. And none of those programs are completely shuttered, but we have reduced the funding into those programs at a savings of $3.2 million because I felt we needed to make space. If we were going to make some of these strategic adds for the highest priority issues, we needed to make reductions in other areas. And so the recommended budget has those reductions in it as well as an offset. I'm going to shift now into the one-time, and then we'll be able to get a little of a fresh face and have Chief Terry come up and talk to us about police. But on the one-time side, really into 4 buckets: homelessness, public safety, streets, and parks. Around homelessness and of course, public safety, the safety and resilience item of the council. We've continued to contribute to our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. You'll see this is a reduction from prior years. We've been contributing $5 million a year. Budget's just tight enough. We're looking at $3 million into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and hope to be able to continue to match that with state matches, but a slight reduction there. And we have on the table the fact that the Open Door Network is building their new shelter, but there are significant funding challenges. So council has requested that we put this as an item for discussion of the council in the budget to make additional contributions to make sure that that shelter expansion happens as well. And then again, I've already talked about the real-time information center. These are the one-time costs for setting up that facility. As it relates to streets, again, next week we'll go into a little bit more detail, but we know that our condition of pavement throughout the city continues to have significant needs. We've got actually a $2.5 million allocation there this year out of PSVS. That's the largest streets allocation that we've made from PSVS and for general resurfacing historically. We've made a commitment to continue to improve street lighting throughout the city. We've done $1 million a year. We're going to continue that. The second item there is around landscaping of our highway corridors. That's been a topic of conversation several times, and we continue to kind of shave those dollars down and never fully address. But we have an opportunity that Caltrans is matching these dollars for us on this 58 to 99 new interchange, and want to take an opportunity to have the look and feel of that be an improvement, in particular compared to what our landscaping has been like historically along the 99, and much more of a hardscaped look that is low maintenance and low cost into the future. We've made more significant investments in multimodal infrastructure and complete streets and traffic calming in years past. But again, because budgets are tighter, we've just made much more modest contributions to continue that work, but at a lower level. And again, the median improvements are really looking at areas where we've got medians that either there's blacktop without medians, or medians that are in disrepair or are not looking good. And that's part of, again, that look and feel, as well as just the quality of maintenance of our pavement throughout the city. But we'll get into more of these details next week. That's a high-level review of the streets funding. As it relates to parks, again, you've seen lists in years past that have 6, 7, 8 projects. It's been fantastic to be able to spruce up our neighborhood parks. We've made huge progress, by the way. We've completed more than 30 park projects in the last 4 years. Big improvements. We don't have what I would argue is major gaps in deferred maintenance. However, we have parks that are reaching the end of their useful life that could still see some upgrades as opposed to just addressing deferred maintenance. But as we looked at the budget, there's just limited ability to do more of those specialized neighborhood park projects. We continue to focus on MLK Community Center as a signature priority project of the City Council, and there are numerous grant opportunities in this coming year, and so we wanted to set aside grant match funds because there's as many as $30 or $40 million in potential grants that we want to make sure that we can go after with some of those match requirements. And then the park amenities and renovation improvements in the presentation you'll see later, you'll see what that does for us, but what it's been doing is these are the small, both deferred maintenance and small additions that go a really long way in our parks, like putting up shade structures or pavilions, adding a small additional amenities. We did this last year, and we've seen incredible results, and so wanted to do this again and not reduce that funding to allow the Parks Department to continue to have the flexibility to make those small improvements that have big impacts. And then lastly, Jastro Park has been, the bandstand remodeling has been on our list for about 2 years now, and it continues to get deferred. So that is the one neighborhood park that we want to make sure we address because it has been the longest on the list for needing to address a deferred maintenance issue. So this is a lot. It's mostly for the public record and to have a summarization, but these are all of the one-time costs into one slide, about $17 million. Now, I just want to make one last note in big picture. There is one unfortunate aspect to the timing of our budget this year is that we've implemented a new ERP system. That's your core financial and human resources system. And it's a big lift. It was funded through the Public Safety Vital Services Tax $20 million project. That is now live on the financial side, and we go live on the HR side in the coming months. Because we've been pushing hard to go live in these spring months, there's one or two aspects of our total citywide budget that are not fully dialed in. And so we're finishing some of those final projections. And my anticipation is that the ultimate budget that the City Council adopts, they will adopt less than, and I'm going to just go one more slide because that's the total. I anticipate the City Council is going to adopt a Public Safety Vital Services tax budget with new or approving items of less than this 21 million, just to be really clear with this committee. As we finalize those projections, I anticipate that we'll look at the total amount of operating costs and ongoing costs in PSVS as well as in the general fund, and that we'll know what is truly available, and I think it's going to be less than that $21 million. And then council will be teed up to make hard decisions about which of those items that you just saw, which again is not a very long list. Council's going to have to choose some items to not include in the budget. Our approach to the committee, again, as the committee's role is to identify whether these items are consistent with the 13 priorities or not. We can take each of these items and that designation by the committee as information to council that ultimately can appropriate less than what the committee looked at. But I do think it would be appropriate in committee comments, as is a part of your role in recommending what are priorities, that this committee could identify those items that you feel are priority within this list. I think that would be valuable information to the council as they're making hard choices, because some things probably won't make the list. But with that, that is the quick high-level look. That's the full scope of what we're even considering this year, which is not as much as in prior years. That's really where we're coming to, is that it's going to be a small amount of one-time monies we really look at each year going forward. And we can pause and do some questions and discussion now, but then we'll have additional time to, again, go deeper on the public safety side and then deeper on the park side.
Great, thank you. That was going to be my question. So, and I'll return to my colleagues before making my comments, but I just wanted a clarifying question. Will we receive in the coming meetings an additional presentation on the homelessness piece, or is this, like, your presentation is it, because it's now in your department? Basically?
Correct.
Okay.
That this is it, but again, happy to entertain more discussion and conversation on that topic, but there's not an additional presentation on homelessness. Correct.
I've got one overarching question, and then I'll turn to my colleagues to see if they have questions or comments. There has been this ongoing council goal around the mix between ongoing cost and one-time costs related to PSVS. And my understanding is council has set a goal. Where are we? I know, given the challenges with budgetary, but I mean, like, as an estimate, where are we in terms of that mix?
No, it's a great question, and we anticipated the question, and I would have had the number for you, but again, that challenge of everything's not totally dialed in. Part of that is actually our salary projections.
Yeah.
And so we don't have what the salaries will be completely dialed in, but as an estimate, we are pushing up against that 60% that's supposed to be for personnel. We could be potentially a little bit over that.
Okay.
And what's driving that is two things. One, we have committed to the classification and compensation study where we have a 4% COLA that we agreed to each year with public safety, and then the 5% COLA for fire and miscellaneous. And as you get into now year 3 of those COLAs, it is putting pressure on the budget, genuinely, both on the general fund and on PSVS. The other piece is the pensions. You know, the pension costs continue to escalate, and there's very little we can do to control CalPERS, but there are things we can do on our side, like the pension trust fund, which we have established and we're putting money into. That's another reason we want to put money into reserves, is to make sure that that doesn't reduce our ability to continue other programs or other priorities that we want to do. So we're really up against that 60% and maybe a little bit beyond it. On the recurring operating side, the goal was 70%, you know, or excuse me, the ongoing was just 70% total, but 60% of the number for personnel was supposed to not go above 60%. And so that the costs that we view as ongoing that are not personnel are things like the Brundage Lane Navigation Center contract, which is, you know, going to be more than $6 million this coming year, and if we expand, it will be upwards of $7 million in that contract. So that's a big chunk that if we're right at 60% or a little above 60% on the personnel side, we'll be right up against the 70% as well for the ongoing. Now, if you just take into consideration the costs that are ongoing, we're up against that 70%. You add on top the operating that are not ongoing commitments, but they are operating costs. We're looking at probably in a $103 million budget, it's going to be more than $80 million in both the ongoing and the operating. So we will have those numbers available for sure for council in the budget process, and I think that's again an expectation that we have to be able to provide those numbers. Whether we'll have that by next Thursday is a little bit of a question mark. Yep. But we will, for the council and the public, clearly reflect in the proposed budget, are we at the 60, are we at the 70? And then it will also be evident, of how much of the total 103 is going to operating and how much is going to just one time. I would also note that we do have fund balance, meaning unspent PSVS funds from last year that are available. We're not recommending that we actually spend all those, but we think that we will recommend a portion can be spent on some of the one-time projects. So the ultimate appropriation of council will be above the $103 million because of the one-time monies. Got it. But we're recommending more than half, well, probably about half of the one-time monies really just go into reserves and fund balance and just don't touch it. But that's, I think, relevant to the question about sort of the percentages and how much of the proportionate budget is going to ongoing and operating and one-time. I think you'll see some additional one-time dollars because of fund balance.
Got it. Okay. Colleagues, questions, comments? Go for it, Commissioner Coman.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. I appreciate it. Mr. Clegg, I was a little confused because you talked about a $21 million, basically a $21,300,000 ask for the PSVS money. But then when I was looking through some of the documentation, there was another number of $25 million. And this was on a report you received from Jennifer Byers from Economic Community Development. And the number for PSVS at that point was $25 million. Did I miss something?
I have to admit, committee member, I'm not sure. We'll have to go back and look closely at that. Okay. We did, well, of course, we actually had, many more suggestions from the different departments about areas where we could use PSVS dollars, and we kept reducing and reducing to basically balance the budget, and that may be a symptom of that there was a higher number of projects at some point. But if so, it was an error in just updating that. And so really it is the 21 is the max recommendation at this point.
So the $103 million, is that the total amount of money available from PSVS Measure N money, or is that the total budget for the city?
That's the total amount of PSVS sales tax revenues.
Okay.
So we're anticipating, and this is a conservative estimate, of $103 million coming in next year. Again, we've got, you know, a fairly healthy amount of additional revenues and savings from prior year, but it's 103 of just PSVS sales tax income.
And so this $21 million is additional funding. You already have the rest of it allocated.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And then I wanted to change subjects on you just a little bit. Because in June of 2023, the grand jury released a report regarding this committee, and there were some findings and some recommendations. And I don't know, I never heard any more about how the city's responding to that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. And that was something actually we were just recently looking at and preparing for the budget process to make sure that we were still responsive to each of the responses that we had made. So as is typical with a grand jury report, you're required to respond within 90 days of your disposition of those items. We did do that, going a little bit off of memory here, but you know, there were some findings of the grand jury that we did not agree with, but it was a small number. The majority of them we agreed with, and identified in some instances there were some pretty low-hanging fixes that were reasonable to say, yeah, we'll make that adjustment, we'll make that change. And then there were some other items where we said we agree with the finding, but our thoughts about the best way to address that are these. And so we have made some adjustments both to our schedule. Part of that was just schedule, part of that was process. And that's reflected in how we've teed this up for the committee this time. Again, not a big difference in look and feel, but just some small adjustments that I think the overarching, if I could summarize the grand jury report, is about the level of engagement with the community. I think also about the level of engagement of the committee itself and the ability to have more discussion and the ability to weigh in a little bit deeper on the topics. It's interesting because I will admit that there was a mix of reviews in the report itself. Some committee members felt like they had lots of ability to comment, and other committee members felt like there was less ability. And so it wasn't unanimous, the feedback even to the grand jury as they reported it. It wasn't unanimous in my read of the report. But I would say overarching, the sentiment was more ability to discuss and then weigh in, as well as more ability, to engage with, the community. And again, some of that is a two-way street where we're available and folks have to choose, to come and engage. But at the committee level, we've left a lot more time in today and next week for that discussion and to have more pauses along the way to solicit that discussion. And again, probably a little bit facilitated by the fact that we have a much smaller list, so it's not going to take quite as long to work through all of those items. But those are all in response to that grand jury report to create more time and space to have more discussion.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Committee Member Abernathy.
Do this. Oh. On that point, I have no clue. We have a meeting today and we have a meeting next week. Is that it?
That is correct.
Okay, so 2 meetings and we'll meet next year at the same time, roughly. That's it?
It could be that, like last fall, we had a special meeting to address, the fact that we had significant revenues and we're thinking about what to do about those, significant one-time revenues. And some years we'll have a mid-year budget process as well. I don't anticipate this coming year having a lot of mid-year monies to do things with. But there's the possibility there'll be other meetings, but otherwise, this body is typically designed to have meetings during the budget process. And again, had we had a much larger slate of items, we could have potentially had additional meetings. But with this short list, we felt like, the 2 4-hour blocks should be sufficient, and also provided those materials 2 weeks in advance of when the decision meeting would be as of next Thursday, so that folks had at least 2 weeks to, let the materials sink in, as well as, think of additional questions you may have. And so that was also one of the recommendations from the grand jury, was at least a 2-week lead time of the materials in advance of decision making. But yes, with the body of, or the scope of recommendations for this year, the 2 meeting dates we felt would be sufficient.
Well, for example, this whole new park ranger project, seems like there should be a real examination, and what are we getting for it, and what did they discover, and who's monitoring the use of the parks, and they're there, and it just seems like there's so much, if we're putting manpower like that, and I would like to know if that's, and that's just one thing. I mean, but anytime we put something new in last year and then this year we just move right on, I feel like, if we're going to advise the council with any real in-depth, and maybe that's coming up, but it just seems like that's a huge issue that I think there's so much, put video cameras in there if we're not getting, like, how many people use these parks, what kind of people are in there, and how many are children, and how many are destroying the bathrooms, all those things. That's what the park ranger is supposed to be telling us about. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that.
Yeah, two thoughts to that point. One, we will have some just high-level updates from our Rec and Parks Director on how the Park Ranger program is working. I would also, though, point out that we have monthly meetings some committees are monthly, others are every other month. We have a meeting every other month of our Safe Neighborhoods Committee of the City Council, and they're getting quarterly updates on the Park Rangers program as one specific program. They're getting quarterly updates on also the gun violence reduction strategy that we have that is funded, $1.5 million funded from PSVS from, I think, year 2 of PSVS that was approved. So it is the purview of the City Council to be monitoring and getting those updates, and having that level of oversight over the programs of the city, as well as, frankly, myself as well, and myself and department directors, it's our jobs to have that oversight and accountability. But the City Council is getting those regular updates and monitoring those programs. And we're happy to provide, I think, updates that are relevant to this committee about items that have been approved in the past, but not necessarily the core scope of this committee to dig into the details of ongoing oversight over those, like it is the City Council's role.
So I definitely understand our scope and our charge, and I am sensitive to that, and I do not want to overstep what our mandate is, and be respectful of the mandate of the council. But I would just say, in relation to Committee Member Coleman's remarks and Committee Member Abernathy's remarks, that one, I do not recall ever receiving the city's response to the grand jury report. I'm sure that if I, looked for it, because it's a public document, I could find it, but it'd be wonderful if that was circulated across the committee. To Committee Member Abernathy's point, and this is something that I have raised in years past, both as a committee member and as a stakeholder, is that, again, being respectful of our roles and our mandate and what the council's ultimate responsibility is, I really do think that there is an opportunity here to talk about the ROI, to talk about, what it is that the community is getting for this investment of tax dollars, and that information just coming back to this committee really makes us feel like the work that we're doing and the time that we're spending here is really worth it, and that it's, resulting in meaningful change. But also, I think it's also a great opportunity for the city from a messaging standpoint to talk about, here is what, but for PSVS, but for these investments, we would not have gotten these things. So I think it's important to start there before we really even start in future years, talking about funding allocations. And again, I know I want to be respect for that. I got one really easy thing, and then I got one harder thing. Next week, when we talk streets and infrastructure, and I don't know if Mr. Strakalus is already planning on this, but I think it'd be really important for this committee to understand, again, from the ROI standpoint, like, what is the current funding mix that goes into the roads? You know, where are they going? What are the limitations? Because like, for instance, you know, transportation development fees can only be spent on those projects that are in the model. So, you know, what does the funding mix go for? And therefore, why is there a need for PSVS dollars on top of gas tax, TDF, other funding streams in order to address infrastructure? On homelessness, I'll ask Mr. Rudnick for a ruling on this. I'm sorry, I should have sent you a note privately. I sit as a board member for the Open Door Network, so I don't know if I should be allowed to vote on the recommendation. I know we're not allocating, we're only making a recommendation. That being said, regardless of my love for that organization, if I am going to vote, I would have to vote no, and I'll tell you why. I truly think, again, going back to ROI, that we need to take a step back on our homelessness spending and our homelessness initiatives and really take a look at, like, strategically, what do we need to do and what is going to move the needle? And I say that not because I don't think we should be spending any more resources on this. I say that because we're making these plans while there are massive changes to state law right now. Prop 1 just passed that requires the county to spend a significant amount of their current, what was then called MHSA, which will now in the future be called BHSA, dollars on capital on going to homelessness. And I mean, I think it would be important to think about these funding streams from the standpoint of, like, there's money that is going to be required under statute to be spent on capital projects. And so if we're spending PSVS money that is can be spent on anything on capital projects, like, you know, could we be utilizing that for homelessness, but maybe in a different capacity? Could we be looking at, like, making improvements around that planned center so that that community doesn't feel like we're dropping, you know, something into their community? There is still people, there are businesses, there are homes around the Dolores Street area. But I think overall, what would be really important, again, not just from a PSVS standpoint, just from a general standpoint, is to just, I mean, again, from just a marketing communications tool, just like, here's what the city has done on homelessness. You're going to be required to report, again, given the changes in state law around, you know, the accountability pieces, what you're doing around homelessness. It's going to be of real import to the administration and to the legislature as they dole out funds. But I think, you know, for this particular funding cycle, I fully support, you know, expanding Brundage Lane. I fully support investing in our operations there. But I do have some concern with providing funding to third-party organizations when there is a tranche of money that's about to be opened up that can only be spent on that purpose. So those are my comments. Any other comments? Yeah. Vice Chair Campbell.
Back to the housing issue here, we had on slide number 12, $3 million for the affordable housing program. If I recall correctly, that was grant money to construct, quote unquote, affordable housing. Is that correct?
Correct.
Can you refresh our memories on how many units we can expect to be constructed for $3 million?
Great question. I'll do some estimation. We're seeing some of our affordable housing projects costing, you know, close to $400,000, anywhere from $300,000 to $400,000 to $500,000 per unit. But what's interesting about the money that we provide is most of these projects are 40, 50, 60 million dollar projects, and we provide anywhere from $500,000, but typically $1 to $2 million of what they call soft money for these projects. They need the initial dollars to then go and get tax credits and to go get other funding. And so we're leveraging our funding to be the catalyst to get lots more funding on bigger projects. So it's hard to say precisely how many units we get for the dollar, but what we could do, and just as an example, we have put about because the initial year of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, lots of that money went into the homeless shelter, actually, initially. And so we've now had 3 cycles of an additional $5 million into the Housing Trust Fund, and that has been leveraged for about now between 800 and 900 units. So that $15 million has produced, just shy of 900 units of our funding being leveraged, with other fundings to create those different units. But I think a fair question. You didn't ask this, but let me also provide some additional context because I think it's relevant to the question. We're looking at the trust fund is not only to give away because we will do a request for proposals or a notice of funding availability for projects, and many of them are these large, multi-unit projects that are the really expensive ones. But there's other ways to try and address affordable housing. There are duplexes, there are infill lots, there are triplexes, fourplexes, accessory dwelling units. That's an additional unit if somebody builds a mother-in-law apartment and, the back part of their parcel or off the alley. We're finding that you can actually build a duplex or a triplex closer to $150,000 per unit. It's not quite as expensive as some of those bigger projects, actually, on a per unit basis. If you look at an accessory dwelling unit, you can build an accessory dwelling unit probably for $75,000, and that's just full cost. If we give away an incentive that might be a $25,000 incentive, and someone puts their own private capital into that, maybe you get a unit for $25,000 or $50,000. So we're also looking to leverage that Affordable Housing Trust Fund in a variety and a diversity of housing types, and we're looking really hard at the per unit cost to how we shift our mix. So we're probably going to do less money into those RFPs for the really big projects. There's value in probably helping make sure that 1 or 2 of those projects is moving forward in any given year. They have long lead times. It takes 3 to 5 years to fully finance, plan, and build those type of projects. And so some of the ones that have come online this year were ones that were funded from the original Affordable Housing Trust Fund allocation 3 years ago. But we're going to look to shift the mix of how we spend that trust fund money to get the biggest bang for our buck, because we've noted that there are better ways than others.
What makes the housing that's built with these funds more affordable than what the market would produce on its own?
Yeah, good question. And if I get a little off base, I'll ask staff to help me with this one. But typically, the per unit cost is higher on these projects for 2 reasons. One is that there is a subsidization of the rent of those into perpetuity. So for a 20-year period, there's a lower rent amount for those units, and that's part of the total financing has to be higher because it includes that subsidization. Secondly, it also includes case management. And so there's wraparound services that are often provided in supportive housing or permanent supportive housing units. And that's also part of what drives that per unit cost. And individuals are getting those wraparound services without necessarily having to pay a higher rent or higher premium. But that's the units. There's different categories. There's 4 different categories of affordability, and depending on what other tax credits or what other grants people are getting to build this affordable housing, it sets whether or not you're at 100% of median income or 115% or 80% or as low as 60% of median income, but you can end up paying rent that is less than market rate as part of the affordability of the project.
So if I understand you correctly, there's some provision for the builder who builds these units that they must rent them out at a rate lower than the market rate.
Correct.
And how is that market rate determined?
It's based off of the federal poverty level and median income.
Okay, but how is the rent rate set?
It's really set by the funding that has been allocated to that program determines whether or not you have to set it at those percentages that I was giving, whether it's at 100% of market or 115% or 80% or 60%. That's determined by the funding mix that is allocated to you in being able to build those projects. So if you get, for example, a grant from one of the federal agencies, they'll stipulate that for these monies, you have to have this number of units that are set at that 60% number or that 80% number.
How do they calculate that number from which they set the 60 or 80%? How do they figure out the market value of that rental unit?
See Miss Byers making her way down. She was like, just like closer and
Thank you,
closer and
Jenny.
closer.
So annually, HCD releases what the affordability rate is, and that's correct. It's based on per person in the household, and so it's a range. And so to be 30% affordable, it's based on if you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 family members in the home. And so it's not an X number. It's based on this graph of you are under this median income for the 30, 60, 120% range, and how many members are in your household. And based off of that, rent is calculated that way. So if you fall into the category, then you're put into the subcategory of number of people per household.
So the rate has nothing to do with the unit itself. It just has to do with the number of people that are intending to live in that unit and their income level.
Yes, it's an apples oranges thing. So we can't just go, oh, it's $800 per month. No, it's based off of that income level per person in the household.
So depending on how many people stay in the household and what their income is, the rent that's actually paid to the landlord might actually exceed what they would get if they just listed it for rent, correct?
Yes, possible. There also becomes with HCD overcrowding situations, and that goes into another topic. But if it's a single mom with 3 children, she's going to be classified differently as 2-income household with 2 children. So it's
I understand, but what I'm getting at is when we use the term affordable, that's just a label that's added to this scheme for the government to basically set prices for rental units that we've also subsidized. Is that correct?
yes.
All right. And so when we use the term market value, that's also kind of a pretend term, correct?
It's a local, it's what market value is in the local. And so when you get into the real estate analysis of things, they'll call market rate for that unit what they're willing to, what an average individual is willing to pay to stay in that unit. And so it's flexible even when you look in the city of Bakersfield, what you would look at as considered market rate. But the affordable housing is specifically set aside. So anybody that doesn't have a covenant could be considered market rate.
All right. I mean, maybe this is just a little too basic, but I mean, my understanding of market value is what a willing buyer is willing to pay to a willing seller when there's a meeting of the minds, when there are no incentives or outside pressures. So it occurs to me that what we're doing here is we're creating a set of incentives and outside pressures with, basically fixing prices. We're labeling it market value then, and then we're labeling it affordable because that sounds great. And then we're spending money to subsidize a landlord to create housing that might actually cost more than actual market value.
And if you're referring to the construction of it, we agree, affordable housing isn't affordable to construct. And that typically is because a market rate developer can get a loan for 100% of the construction. But then when you start to utilize or layer government funding, such as city funding, state funding, federal funding, then you have a clause that it needs to be affordable based on wherever the funding is from. It has to be affordable for 25 years. It has to be affordable for 50 years. And so you can't, an affordable housing developer can't go and get 100% bank loan because you have these future restrictions on the property.
Which may restrict the profitability of the project and therefore the ability to repay the loan. Is that what you're saying?
That's why an affordable housing developer like the Housing Authority of Kern County can't get 100% loan for the project because it is limited in the future 25, 40, or 50 years of affordability to be made available to those in the classification of that 30%, 60%, and 80% AMI.
Now, has the city explored the possibility of relieving some of the costs of construction that are related to regulatory oversight, permitting costs, and those kinds of things to incentivize organic housing construction and true market value rents.
We haven't for those that wouldn't require a clause of affordability. And so this funding has been set aside for that affordability. But once they have to layer, so it's typical if you go for tax credits, which is what Housing Authority typically does. They go for the tax credits. Sagewood Apartments, they also received a tax credit. There's been studies out there that they have to layer 4 to 8 funding sources. You have to pay prevailing wage. Depending on where your funding source is from, you either pay federal prevailing wage or you pay state prevailing wage. And all of that requires a different level of documentation, and that's really where some of the expense comes in. But like the city manager was stating, we're really looking at what other things you can do. If duplex, triplex are cheaper to construct just because of their size, we're also looking at acquiring some tax default properties that we can release to others and using funding that way. Can we get a site through tax default, vacant property, and then do an RFP for someone like Habitat for Humanity to build on it, and they could build at a cheaper rate just because they have sweat equity. And so looking at other ways that it doesn't get tied up into all of the prevailing wage cost of construction.
Yeah, let me jump in and add a little bit to that as well, because Ms. Byers is correct. And I think particularly from the affordable housing, as you've mentioned, it's a label and and a category. But to answer your question about, is the city looking at other ways to just create more incentive in the private market to build? And I would say yes, and a couple other ways in addition to what Ms. Byers had mentioned. So there are some things that are within our sort of capacity to influence or control, and other things that are not. But one of those is our permit process. The time that it takes to go through a permit process, time is money for developers. And so we're actually going through a process right now of streamlining our permit process to make it more predictable, to make it faster, to incentivize that private development. Because I have to, you didn't ask this question, but I hope it's relevant to the conversation to point out that even if we're creating 800 or 900 units of what are under government code labeled affordable housing units, we need thousands and thousands of market rate units to address the supply and demand challenges of housing in Bakersfield. And so we need to do that through the private market. And the only way we're really going to address affordability of housing in Bakersfield is through private markets. I mean, we know that there is a place in the spectrum of housing options for those that are the most challenged to have places to live and in quality housing, and we hope work towards greater self-sufficiency. But we need many private market units built. So we are addressing that through our, again, as I mentioned, our permitting process. We also collect development impact fees. We're looking at our impact fees. One of the challenges, if you don't collect enough impact fees, you don't have enough money to fix your roads or to build your parks. But we're looking at how do we continue to maintain our impact fees at levels that are more competitive than than other communities throughout California. We would probably be hard pressed to compete with some communities outside of the state, just some of our realities. But we're looking at our impact fees that we collect. We're looking at our permitting process to make sure that it is streamlined as possible. And then we are looking at some other incentives. As Ms. Byers noted, if the city provides a direct benefit to a private developer, it triggers prevailing wage, and many of our private developers have said no thank you. And so we're looking at what is, again, within our purview that would be a benefit to developers, and that's often the infrastructure side of things. So if we're proactively putting in sewer and water and streets and sidewalks, that is less cost to the developers of making their development. I would acknowledge that we're prioritizing those types of efforts into areas where we're trying to help push the market a little bit, because admittedly there are parts of the city where the private market is driving development, and that's happening. We don't need to push that and let the market do its work. But there are other areas like infill into downtown that the private market is not necessarily driving that as much as we think that the benefits there could be, again, to just efficient use of tax dollars. And so we're putting infrastructure into those areas to reduce the private development costs, and that's one way to incentivize development without triggering about a bunch of the legal challenges with it.
These grants, the $3 million is proposed if a developer accepts some of that money. That is a direct benefit to the developer that triggers some of those wage obligations, correct?
Correct.
Is it considered a direct benefit to the developer to give an incentive in the form of some kind of a discount on the permitting costs?
It is, and this is a question that actually has come up, and we've done some analysis on it. We do feel like in certain circumstances it would trigger prevailing wage, yes, because it does look like a direct benefit. And again, probably the one that we found that is the most of benefit that doesn't trigger it is really providing those offsite infrastructure improvements.
So it appears that we've got a situation where the cost of developing housing is so high, partly due to the regulatory costs that are imposed by the state, and some, of course, local as well. And so we have a shortage of housing, and so now we're taking tax dollars to subsidize the construction of housing, which makes the housing cost more, because now we have to pay prevailing wage for a very difficult to define benefit that might result in a landlord who receives this money collecting more in rent than he would get on the actual market, which seems like a perverse scramble of incentives and circular spending. I guess the point I'm trying to make is perhaps if we were to focus on relieving some of the barriers to the incentives that exist in a normal market for the construction of housing, that we might actually get more bang for our buck. Look at places where they don't have a shortage of housing. And I realize it's not the city of Bakersfield's fault that the state of California is strangling the construction industry with regulations and taxes. But it is a reality that we do have some say here. And so I would submit to the council, who has authority to make these decisions, that perhaps a better use of the money, the PSVS money, would be to incentivize construction on the actual market, not just labeled with, market value or affordable or whatever, to actually try to make things more affordable in reality rather than just in the label or the category. So that's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, duly noted.
All right, I think we are ready to move on.
All right, I will just take a quick opportunity as we transition to the police department to acknowledge a couple of points made by the chair earlier. I believe we sent out the grand jury report to the committee, but we will send it again. We will absolutely share it with you. It makes a lot of sense for that to be in front of the committee, and regardless of where they send it out, a good reminder of what was in there. As just one, two. You will see the next two presentations. They'll be able to cover some of the things that are the good news about how we did spend the money, but also, again, good points, duly noted. I mean, I think it's fair both from a transparency and accountability standpoint to give reports and updates on the expenditure of PSVS, and it is an opportunity to highlight the good work that we're doing. I would point back as well. We have I guess, numerous ways that we try and get the word out. This is a really good opportunity, but also we're looking forward to a pending also sort of annual report of, like, by the numbers, a lot of data analysis on what are we getting for those dollars that we're doing each year, and we're wrapping another one of those up in the near future too. But with that, we will transition to Chief Terry to talk about police.
Welcome, Chief.
Good morning. Oh, thank you. Good morning, Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to talk to you once again. We have always, and we will continue to purpose to ensure that our request for PSVS are in alignment with the priorities of the measure and the council goals, but also in a meaningful way, meeting the public safety needs and concerns of our community as well. And as always, we remain committed to partnering with our community to protect life and property, and that really is our mission. Before we get to, and staff will get into some of the specific requests, what I thought I would do is, we are in our 5th year now of PSVS, and so I thought I would take you through with a broad overview of some of the outcomes and activities of the police department over the last 5 years and some of the ways that we've utilized the resources that have been provided to us. Staffing. When PSVS came about, it was one of the main goals was to hire 100 officers over a 3-year period. We are still doing that work and trying to reach that net 100 gain over a 3-year period. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of information here on this slide of where we are in terms of the numbers, the number of people that we have hired, how many people have graduated the academy, what percentage of people are graduating the academy that enter the academy, and then what is the class average size. So the class size average is actually 21, not 20. But as you can see, over the last 5 years, we're here in our 5th year, we've hired over 270 people to go into the academy. 168 have graduated. Earlier on in the first couple of years, I think even going back, well, it says 2019, our graduation rate, we saw a lot of attrition, a lot of people leaving the academy very quickly within the first week or two. That continued for a couple of years. And so it wasn't a real surprise to us. I mean, traditionally, that is kind of what had occurred. And it was not unique to us in the academies, but we thought this is such an important goal and such a critical investment that we're making, a significant one that we're making as well. How can we go about engaging those individuals, those recruits, helping to prepare them in a much better way so that they're not shocked when they come into the academy environment, that they're not shocked physically about what's being asked of them, and all of the other things that go into the academy as well. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of all of that, some of the initiatives that we've instituted to increase our staffing, specifically the different ways that we've gone about recruiting, how we've engaged with some of the recruits, what some of those outcomes have been. And so I just wanted to list here just a couple of initiatives that we've done over the last couple of years. Our continuous recruitment schedule. So what that means is the Pellet B is a state exam that you take to enter the academy. We are now offering that 3 times a month. That has kind of progressed over the last several years. We have about 25 people that will show up on any of the test dates, but we offer that, like I said, 3 times a month. We're even taking walk-ins at times. That is not something that we used to do. People can just show up. You can self-schedule. So there's a lot of opportunities that we've tried to be more accessible for the testing process so that people can be better informed. Obviously, there's been some hiring incentives, both for people coming into the academy, laterals getting an incentive. We've also had, over the last couple of years, instituted an employee referral incentive, again, focusing on trying to get our academy staffing up. There's been a dedicated website. joinbpd.us is now our recruiting website, and that went active about 2 years ago. The recruitment engagement team, we now have, and really have from the beginning because it was necessary to create the infrastructure to begin hiring in such large numbers. We have a great working relationship and collaboration with Human Resources. And they've been a great partner in helping us provide that, or providing for us that expertise in human resources and really helping us develop recruit engagement. And so when somebody applies or they show up to take the written test and then begin the application process, we have staff from the police department, officers that immediately connect with them and kind of mentor them all the way through the application process. We have voluntary workout sessions that we're encouraging recruits or candidates to come to so they can physically get prepared for the academy environment. It also gives them a chance to interact with academy staff, to learn more about what's expected of them. And we've seen some improvement in the attendance on these voluntary workout sessions. It's also a reflection, I think, of the number of people, the percentage that is increasing of people graduating from the academy. We're seeing that that those that engage with us early on through the application process are actually, more of them are being successful in the academy. Because it is a different world when you have no idea about what this is about, the policing is about, the recruiting process is very lengthy and can be complicated, and so it's very important. We thought that we were missing some opportunities early on to directly engage with these candidates and help them understand how important they are to the police department, how important they are to the community. And so those are some of the initiatives that we've done to see some success. The sponsoring of academy equipment, that was new, relatively new in the last couple of years. So if somebody gets a job offer and they're going into the academy, they've got to buy uniforms, they've got to buy PT gear and things like that, flashlights. We provide a lot of the duty belt and all of the other necessary equipment. But those were some of the early things that a recruit had to buy or had to purchase before they went into the academy. And it's expensive, and many of them did not have the ability to do that substantially. We had people leave the academy because they couldn't afford to buy the equipment. And so that was part of another initiative that was done in the last couple of years to provide that initial uniform to the recruit and give them the workout gear and the flashlight and boots, etc., so that they are prepared. We have a full-time recruitment team now that works very and engages the public very heavily through our website, but over the last couple of years have gone to nearly 200 recruit events as well. We do surveys, trying to learn from those that are exiting the academy. Why did you exit the academy? Why now? What's going on? Is there a way for us to help you? Where are there lessons learned for us through the application process, through the testing process? As they entered the academy, what can we learn from them? And so these are just a sample of all the things that we've done over the last couple of years to ensure success, to ensure that we get people into the academy, that they are successful so that they can be out into the street. This is one of the priorities right out of the measure, a rapid response to assaults, gang violence, and robberies. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Those are the categories of our highest priority crimes or highest priority calls for service. And so our priority 1 response time last year was at 6 minutes and 45 seconds, down just a second from the year before, but down from about 15 seconds from 2021. There's still nearly 290,000 911 calls that are coming into the comm center. About 260,000 incidents were dispatched through the police department last year. Over 750,000 phone calls went into the comm center, so it is a very busy place. But we are tracking, obviously, these highest priority calls. Priority 1 is that life-threatening emergency ongoing at the moment. Priority 2 and priority 3 calls are still very much an emergency, that people could be injured, that they're needing medical attention, or the situation is just not safe. Those priority 2s and 3s are still very important to us. The public needs us to get there, because at the bottom line is when the public calls, they expect us to come. And they expect us to come as quickly as we can and to resolve the issue. So priority 1 is that highest, and we've seen some reductions in our response time over the last couple of years. Priority 2 and 3, response times are still not what we want them to be, but they are improving. For priority 2, it was about 40 minutes for our response time in 2022, and last year it was about 32 minutes. From our priority 3 was over an hour and 25 minutes or so for a priority 3 call in 2022. And it was down to about an hour and 12 minutes in 2023. So we've seen some improvements in the response times, and there are, I think, a lot of reasons that we could talk about that contribute to that. Resources certainly is a part of it. Diversifying our workforce and trying to spread and be smarter about the work that's coming into the police department, and making sure, I mean, we have this conversation frequently about making sure that officers are doing the things that only officers can do. And if there are opportunities for us to divert or have different types of responses, then we're looking to do that. So we've been able to do that and are continuing to do that over the last couple of years. But I wanted to give you a couple of things here on this slide, really as direct response to the police department's activities and operations in response to this priority over the last couple of years. ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter is our gunshot detection system. It covers 6 square miles of the city. And why these 6 square miles is because data over a very long period of time shows that there is more gun violence and gunfire in this particular areas of the city. So that's where the technology was placed. And we've seen some reductions in gunfire over the last couple of years. There's about an 8% reduction last year over the year before, and about 32% since ShotSpotter was fully covering in these areas, these 6 square miles. So what ShotSpotter is specifically, very quickly, is someone is not required to call 911 when they hear gunfire. The technology is there. The police department gets immediately notified that there's been gunfire, and it tells us exactly where to go. It not only gives us address, it will give us a GPS coordinate so that we know to go in the backyard of a residence or on the side of the house or in the driveway. It will precisely tell us within like 7 or 10 meters of where the gunfire occurred. And so it is a very precise response. It has enabled us to improve our response times because we're going to the right place right out of the gate. It's enabled us to provide immediate medical aid to those that need it, that may be injured from the gunfire, but it's also enabled us to take people into custody and seize firearms. But it's also beyond all of those very, very good things. It also is a message to our community that they're seeing us there when these things occur. Very few, the reality is that very few of our community members call 911 in some of these areas when they hear gunfire. It has become so routine and all of those kinds of things. They don't think they think our response time will be lengthy, or they think we don't care. All of those are things that we don't want our community members to live in an environment that they live in. And so having this technology, seeing us respond directly, immediately to those areas and help work on the issue is a very important message that we need to send to our community. And so we're very grateful for the technology. But in the big picture, that's how it works. And I think there's a lot of benefit about it. The last 2 items here really have to go about gun and gang violence. That was very much a focus and a priority of the measure. Through the work of the CalVIP program, our gun violence strategy, I think it can be referred to in a couple of different ways. But essentially, it is the work of the police department being very intentional, very strategic in working on gun and gang violence in collaboration with many community partners. The police department meets weekly to look at shootings over the previous 7 days. Let's talk about where they occurred, when they occurred, who was involved, who was the victim, who was the suspect, who do we think might be the suspect, what might we know about what's going on from the police department's perspective. And then we will leave that meeting, then we'll go into meetings with community members who are engaged in the community in a variety of different ways, and we will share information with them, and they will go very often. I know that family, I know this person, this is what's been going on between that. There is a very clear line in the sharing of information. It kind of goes one way. The police department is giving information to the community members, but they're informed, and then they can go out and engage the involved parties and help prevent and interrupt and disrupt conflict and prevent retaliatory shootings and things like that. Over the last couple of years since we've been involved in the CalVIP program, we've seen great success. Our homicide rate, the number of homicides have decreased over two consecutive years now. After we had an all-time record high in 2021, you've now seen significant reductions in murders in our city. And the CalVIP program, and specifically gun and gang violence reductions and gang-related shootings that people survive are all going down. And a lot of it is directly due to this type of work. But again, it's also from the resources that have been provided to the police department as well. Investigating and proactively preventing property crime, that was also another significant priority for the measure. So there, I just wanted to list a couple of different things here that have been new, that have occurred over the last couple of years. The very first thing wasn't new. For a long time, we responded if your home was broken into or your business was broken into, a police officer would respond. Over the years, we had police service technicians, now a civilian position that would be the primary response to those kinds of offenses. There were a number of years that due to staffing and due to calls for service and other things that we did not have that response. When the measure came back, one of the first goals, the first things that we did was to hire enough police service technicians so that we could restore an in-person response to a home or a business, that you could actually get a police department personnel there on the scene. Now, we still don't have enough of them, and our community is waiting a long time sometimes for these kinds of responses, but they do exist and they have been restored, and we're continuing to look for ways for us to improve that. A topic as of late in the last couple of years certainly is organized retail theft. We've all seen it. We understand what that is. We took some of the resources that have been provided in terms of personnel and created an organized retail theft unit. It is primarily made up of detectives in the investigations unit. This year, we received a $6 million grant from the state that is also funding overtime. It's funding technology and equipment and vehicles that will improve our response to organized retail theft. As you can see, they've been very busy. The unit was just created, really went on to work in October of last year. And as you can see, they've made a lot of arrests and a lot of assets being recovered. We work very closely with the statewide task force and many other police department units. We've seen some significant improvement in our relationship with the businesses there for a long time, and still to some extent exists today, that many of the businesses don't report theft for either a policy decision at the corporate level, or just that sort of apathy and that feeling that it's just occurring so frequently, it takes the police department so long to get here, nothing gets done, and so they just don't report. So we've really been working hard over the last year, 2 years really, of engaging our businesses. We meet monthly. We have an organized retail theft meeting with police department staff and our commercial folks, loss prevention agents, to try to share information and learn from each other, but really to encourage people to call and report it. And we've seen a lot of success from that. The impact unit, you may have heard a little bit about them already. That is our primary response to homelessness and quality of life kind of related, police-related issues. They're very active in the downtown area. They really do lead our partnership with private security in terms of coordinating them, where they deploy them, and they are very busy. The impact unit is made up of police officers that are working the field, but the unit also has co-response teams with Kern Behavioral Health, and as I said, they're also very active with our private security partnerships as well. Meeting with them, deploying private security every single week, looking at the data, where are the hot spots, where do we need them to go, and then again, very active with our behavioral health co-response teams. In terms of partnerships, I talked about it. I mean, that is one of our main focuses and purposes of how we're accomplishing our public safety related responsibilities is the development of partnerships. Another example of that, besides the co-response teams in the field, and we talked a little bit about this before, is our mental health clinician in the comm center. So when a 911 call comes in, there is a clinician, a mental health clinician in the comm center. That 911 call gets transferred to them, and then they work through that individual or the family and connect them with hopefully the mental health resources that are already there. And what we've seen over the last year is about 85% of the time when a call is transferred to this clinician, they're able to resolve it without any police response. And so we are looking at every opportunity and every lever we can pull to divert emergency calls or requests for service from the police to where it needs to be and where the community member needs it to be and where the police department needs it to be so that we can focus on what is our primary responsibility. Right now we have 2 clinicians that are working. The third one is in background. So we still have 2 shifts. We have a total of 5 patrol shifts. So we have 2 shifts that currently there is no mental health clinician coverage for. We've had some difficulty, as everybody has, with staffing, and Kern Behavioral Health is the employer of this clinician, and so we've been working with them trying to get the staffing up, but it has been a very successful program, and I can very much imagine us coming back in future years as the staffing becomes available to be able to do that, because it is shown to be very successful. It's getting the community member who is in crisis the help that they need the most and allowing the police department to focus on what is our responsibilities. Another one of the priorities of PSVS was the expansion of the School Resource Officer Program. Going back many years, we had a large unit, and then it greatly diminished down to probably 1 prior to PSVS. But now we are back at 5, and these are the following school districts that we're involved in. And so, again, it is really just kind of a holistic approach of trying to deal with the public safety issues that are facing the community, and getting to the youth as soon as we possibly can. And again, there are a lot of things about the public safety world and the tasks that we're responsible for that we don't really have the ability to control or the ability to influence root causes. And so, but yet there is nobody else to call. And so we are really trying to engage the community wherever we can, and leverage the resources that we have. And the council and the committee here has been very supportive of us, and we certainly appreciate that. But I wanted to give you kind of a quick overview, and there are many other things that I know that our community is facing. The calls for service and the response times for some of these higher priority calls. One of the things that we've instituted this last year was automating our telephonic reporting system. It's now available in 30 different languages. It's supported by AI, and it went live, I think, in September of last year or October. Still working out some of the kinks, so it's and perhaps some of you or your family members haven't tried to engage that, and so we're still working on it. We're the first agency in California to use this particular system. But again, a significant resource for us from my perspective, but again, just an example of the way that we're trying to diversify the way that we look at public safety challenges, because we know there are many. We've seen some improvements over the last couple of years. You guys have supported the return of the police motorcycle unit as well. We're now at 17 motors that are out on the road. Obviously, speeding and traffic issues are significant in our community. Last year, we did see some significant reductions in the overall collisions and fatals, and pedestrian fatals in particular. But this year, I would tell you it's ticking back up very quickly. And unfortunately, I think that we're going to meet or surpass the pedestrian fatalities numbers that we had last year. So we know that traffic is a significant issue for us. And so I think those were the kind of the overview that I wanted to give you before staff comes and moves on to some of the specific requests. Defer to you if you want to have questions now on some of that. If not, we'll just move forward.
Any questions for the chief from my colleagues? No? Yeah, go for it. Committee Member Matland.
Once again, thank you. Your information is always spot on, and a great presentation. I had a $400,000 theft last week, and your officers were there helping. But your presentation, every time you come here, you do just a wonderful job, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, it's these men and ladies sitting behind me, so I thank you for them.
Any other comments, questions? Committee Member Prince.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. President, as well. Just a couple of quick questions in regards to your reductions. I know you mentioned in the last 2 years, there's been about a 50% reduction in homicides. Do you attribute that to anything in particular?
Well, one of the significant things was the work through the CalVIT program and the reduction in gang and gun violence in particular. We've seen substantial reductions over the last 2 years with gang-related shootings, and we know very often that those result in homicides. And so that is what I would say is the most significant factor in the reduction of homicides.
Okay. You also mentioned that you have the newly established retail theft unit, which I think is also very important. What is the department doing in regards to either a set aside or a department that handles identification theft, for an example, which is a huge burden on a lot of community members as well, particularly checking accounts or credit card fraud and things of that nature?
Yeah, okay. Difficult question. Certainly understand it, and it's a difficult thing for us. So the short answer to you, we do have financial crimes detectives that work financial fraud, but the threshold is very high for cases to be assigned. It is an unfortunate reality. The frequency and the number of identity theft and the different ways that it occurs is so the number is so significant that we don't have the resources to work all of those cases. So we've had to prioritize and establish some thresholds of what a case or a loss must be before it gets assigned to a detective for a financial crime. There are a lot of resources that are available, both the state and the federal level, to help people with identity theft, and so we often refer them to that. If it looks like there's a larger issue that's going on, we work with our federal partners too. I think it's called I3, if my memory serves me right, is a federal resource where people can go and report identity theft or identity fraud. But again, the sheer volume of it, it's impossible based on our staffing now to assign all of those cases, so we have to set a threshold. Also, the reality is the businesses and the banks often reimburse the individual who has been the victim of it. And so we don't see a lot of sometimes cooperation from the victims because their funds have been restored by the banks. And then when we go to the banks, they are not cooperative with us. They force us to get search warrants. They force us to get a lot of information just to be able to work the case. And so there's some challenges around all of that, just logistically and how we work a case. But short answer is that there is a threshold that we've had to set, and I don't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head for identity theft. But we will take the reports. They're online reports mostly, unless the loss is significant. Then we will send an officer or a detective, depending on the particular issue, to investigate it.
Okay, that's pretty interesting in regards to the lack of cooperation with some of the institutions. I know that I've sat up here for the past 5 years, and I think I've seen you make appearances up here as well in your requests. And initially, with the measure, it indicated the fact that the department wanted to set a goal of hiring an additional 100 officers. Given the fact that there has been a lot of other hiring within the department that has helped to reduce some of the work in the fields, hopefully for some of the officers, do you still stand by the need for 100 officers?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I appreciate the question. I would tell you that the need is more than 100. We haven't been able to get to the 100. And so I think we talked a little bit about this last year. We are significantly trying to diversify the resources that we have. We're about 70-30 in terms of sworn versus professional staff. It's kind of where we've been over the last probably 5 or 6 years in particular. It's kind of an industry standard, but there is certainly in the last couple of years been more of a focus on civilianizing law enforcement where they can. And so I think we've already talked about a couple of those kinds of examples. What I would tell you in terms of probably in the next year's request, we're going to be in a better position to come back to, and what we've purposed to do and didn't want to do is just come back here and say, we need 110, it's 120. We want to really be able to have an informed conversation about this is the number of officers that we need and this is why. If we can get some of our professional staff, if we can expand our partnerships, one of the things that we're looking at right now is whether or not our contracted security contractors that we're using for private security patrols, can they take that initial police report? Could they be the initial response to a business? That they are in the area, they see a broken window, could that security guard be the initial reporting party for it? We're working through what that looks like. The clinicians in the comm center, expanding our co-response teams, our partnerships with behavioral health. Those involve police officers and a mental health clinician in a car responding to calls for service. We have some of those. If we can increase very, very quick examples of those kinds of things, and I think there are others, then that changes the number that we're talking about in terms of police resources. And so we didn't really nail that down and focus on it this year because we're not yet at complement. But I would tell you that in the years to come that there is going to be a more intentional, and we'll be able to have an informed conversation with you about why we need this number of officers. These are all of the different things that we've done, all of the other sort of levers that we've pulled and exercised, and the partnerships that we've developed that now we need, and we're focusing on police to do what police can do. A couple of the positions that you're going to see here in just a minute is to be able to civilianize a position and return sworn people to the field. And so these early years have been certainly growth and trying to get a minimum number of resources, get our impact teams built up so that we can be responsive to some of the community's most urgent needs and concerns. We now have 3 impact teams. So we've tried to be strategic in where the department grows, but we've also been very focused in civilianizing, developing partnerships, and really having the public at large share responsibilities for public safety instead of the police department bearing the burden and the responsibility for it all, because the reality is that we can't solve these issues alone. There are so many issues that we're responding to every single day. The untreated mentally ill and those that are addicted to substance that are out in our community. The police department is the primary response right now in a realistic way that we can't address. The city manager talked about some of these 11 individuals that were consuming so much of our time. Those 11 individuals were arrested cumulatively more than 100 times. So very short, very succinct example, though, of our response to things that we don't control the underlying issue. And so we've really been purposing to where can our resources be most efficient, most effective. We need other people to come to the table, why we're diversifying and trying to develop partnerships, the public safety response, having a security guard take the initial police report. We're exploring a lot of those kinds of things so that we can come back to you and the council and really have an informed conversation. But again, go back to my short answer. It's more than 100. I just don't have the number.
All right, last question. Up to this date, and of course, past 5 years, have any of your requests from the police department have been declined or rejected by this committee or the measure?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Committee Member Prince. Any other comments, questions? Yeah, go for it, Committee Member Abernathy.
Maybe you could direct me, when I see, and I look at the Californian, and I don't often, sometimes I see the time of day on these pedestrian deaths. I don't know if there's a source so we can see them, because when people look for answers, when I see a lot of them in the paper, it's 2:30 a.m. You know, it's 11:30 at night, and the bikes I see have no lights, and riding their bike against traffic in the lane. Is there a place we can go to, I'm interested in this, to see what's the real issue where this is happening? Because they're making a lot of reforms on us drivers, but, you know, if someone's coming at you in the opposite direction walking at 2:30 in the morning, it's kind of tough.
Okay, very good question. I don't know that there's a single source other than we've tried to be, even in the last 6 months or so, tried to be a little bit more descriptive and informative in our news releases, that when we send out for fatal collisions, really talking about the roadway, talking about the speeds that are involved, the area, and be a little bit more descriptive of how the accident occurred for that kind of information. Because you're right, very often I think the data is pretty clear that for pedestrians and bicyclists, they're in the roadway at the wrong place, going in the wrong direction. It is very often at dark or at night, or not in areas that are not well lit. And so I know we're having a lot of these conversations across the city about ways that we can improve overall safety around that, and certainly near the roadways. But there is a level of personal responsibility that's got to be there as well. But also, when I talked about when you look at some of the pedestrians in particular and the fatalities that are occurring, it's a significant number of people that are being killed in our city. And very often when we look at it, it's a mental health and a substance abuse issue at its core. And so there are other needs, more than the police department can provide, to address this issue. But I would think right off the top of my head to refer you back to the police department when we're sending out news releases, because we've tried to be a little bit more descriptive so that you can be informed, such as you're talking about.
And I apologize if I missed this, on the number of vacancies, how many of those approximately are command staff? How many are rank and file? Percentages are fine.
Yeah, no, I was trying to think through that. They're all, they're not all patrolmen, but they're detectives, they're senior officers.
Okay.
And so most of the command staff positions are currently filled.
Got it. Okay. All right. I think that's it. We're approaching 2 hours in. Can we take like a 10-minute break? Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Perfect. That's okay. Perfect.
We will reconvene in 10 minutes. All right, we are reconvened. Thank you for your patience.
Okay, Chair and members of the committee, I'll kind of look forward now as to what our request will be for this next year. But again, just these are our continuing priorities in the areas of focus for the police department. Certainly staffing is. We plan to have 2 academies. We have one ongoing now, it has 20 in it. It will graduate in June. The next academy starts July 1st, and we are planning to have another academy in January of next year. Reducing crime, obviously, and the fear of crime, and all that means, and how our community is impacted by that. We will continue to use our sort of holistic approach to ensure that we're leveraging all of the resources, developing partnerships, engaging the community, and really trying to share that public safety responsibility. Violent and property crime, quality of life issues will continue to be a priority for us. Reducing vehicle and pedestrian fatalities will continue to be the focus operationally. Reducing response times, really that fundamental responsibility of when the public calls that we will go and that we will get there as quickly as possible and deal with the issue. Those are our highest priority calls. We have 9 priorities, but priority 1, 2, and 3 are the highest priorities, and those are the things that are significantly impacting the life and health and safety of people. Problem solving, really our approach continues to be that collaborative partnership community policing focus where we are really working to identify long-term chronic issues and who can we bring to the table with us to help resolve this kind of issue. That is really our focus, and that is the way that we are working. Trust building and the community's trust and confidence in the police department is a key component of this. When we talk about sort of the lack of reporting or apathy and some of those cooperative type things, our relationship with the community has a direct effect on that. And so a lot of our focus continues to be, we have a new, we have a new division that we've consolidated some units into what's called the Community Engagement Division. And it is made up of our Community Relations Unit, our School Resource Unit, PAL, and some of the other police department resources to particularly focus on that, engaging and educating the community so that they can be a good partner with us in problem solving, but also so they can have trust and confidence in the police department's work and priorities. So, because without the community support, we will certainly not be able to solve the issues that we're responsible for. Employee wellness continues to be a focus, a priority focus for us as well, really trying to address holistically the whole of our employees. This is both for our professional staff and our sworn staff as well. We have a wellness center that opened last year. It's staffed full-time by one of our sergeants, and then we have a peer support team and of chaplains and a variety of other volunteers and other resources for employee wellness. And I would tell you that our employees are using it. A large number of our employees and their families are engaging in the wellness services to numbers that I would not have expected. You sort of think that the officers and the different things that they see and the dispatchers and detectives and some of the crime scene people, you know, it seems very clear the issues, the trauma and some of the very difficult issues that they deal with every day, and there are. But we're also seeing that so much of our staff is impacted by wellness-related issues, and this includes records clerks who are looking at reports and they're dealing with victims. And so there's a variety of different ways that our staff is impacted in a wellness-related issue. And so it is very important for us that we're making resources available to our staff so that they can be healthy, so that we can be what our community needs us to be. And lastly, the stipulated judgment. We are in our year 3 with our stipulated judgment agreement with the Department of Justice and working through that. Year 3 is really now kind of looking at implementation, getting into compliance. And it is mandates that we have to comply with. And there's some significant staff resources that go towards us getting into compliance with stipulated judgment. And so by necessity of all of this, it is a significant priority for the police department. And again, not just the public safety issues, but we're also looking for ways to reach compliance and full and effective compliance with the stipulated judgment, but also balancing that to ensure that police officers are doing what police officers need to do for our community. So those are really the overview of where we're looking at and the things that we're working on, the different categories of things and priorities that we will continue to work on into the next year. And so I'll turn it over to Assistant Chief Stratton now to go through, and Assistant Chief Blakemore to go through some of the very specific personnel requests.
Good afternoon. Like Chief Terry said, we'll kick it off talking a little bit about some of the requests as it relates to the positions for this year. Each of our staff request are professional staff positions, and I will add that we've listened to a lot of the feedback that's been provided over the last couple of years about what we might be able to contract, what we might be able to outsource, what kind of professional staff we might be able to hire to really look at returning police officers to the street. One of the first positions we'd like to talk about is a public affairs and communications manager. And I recall that was something that we spoke about last year as well. This is a position that will report to the office of the police chief and really look at helping develop and improve our overall ability to communicate effectively. We think that this is quite a skill. We think it's a skill that quite frankly police officers don't always have. And so we'd look to hire and develop somebody that has that kind of that training, the education, the ability to communicate on a variety of different platforms, and really meeting some of the modern day technological ways that we can communicate for the police department to be able to do that a little bit more effectively. Currently, this position is held and filled by a police sergeant, and we think that professionalizing this position will allow us to be able to return a police sergeant back to field-related duties. One of the next positions that we're asking for will be it's in here as a police program coordinator. We're still working through with human resources to figure out the exact most appropriate title, whether it's a community relations specialist, a police program coordinator, what exactly it is. But ultimately, currently we have a police sergeant assigned to the Police Activities League. We think this is an important component of our intervention and prevention work as it relates to gun violence related strategies, just based on the area and the kids in which we pull from every day. But being able to have a safe environment for kids to be able to come after school, to get tutoring, to be able to play sports. There's work that's done as it relates to payroll and admin and just keeping the facility going that right now, and for years, a police sergeant has been doing. We've had somebody in a leadership role there to be able to make decisions, and we'd like to make sure that we keep police officers there and engaged in building those relationships from a preventative measure and being able to provide a safe place for kids to be. But we don't think that it needs to be a police officer per se doing it. We think that it can be somebody from our community engagement division assigned to our community relations unit that can help work through providing these programs. The next position I'd like to talk to you about is a police service technician that's assigned to our traffic unit. So we see that our police service technicians, as we've been able to increase the complement of they're able to handle non-injury and injury-related accidents, thus keeping the motor officers and the traffic officers that you see there, allows them to be 10-8. When we can have our police service technicians handle more of these things, the officers can focus on prevention, on education, on enforcement, or on things that only police officers can do, and really being able to leverage our professional staff here. We've seen that as we look at some of the workload, our police service technicians are able to handle reports a lot quicker and being able to get to them, and just, again, freeing officers up to have forward-facing street-related duties. So these are the requests that I'm going to cover, and I'll pause here to answer any questions from my section, and if not, I'll turn them over to the rest to my partner, Assistant Chief Jeremy Blakemore.
Committee Member Abernathy.
I was just wondering, how much time would you say it takes for, these are traffic accidents?
Yes, ma'am.
Right, that the police officer then spends writing it up? Is it half the day? I mean, with all the,
It really depends on the severity of the accident. On our fatal collisions, they're very similar to running like you would a homicide investigation, especially if there's the possibility of prosecution. And we will still continue to have officers assigned to that, but there is additional administrative work. There's additional assistance that our police service technicians help in those type of cases. Those cases take weeks and months to do because they're very, very in-depth as it relates to information and crash data, electronic data that's inside of vehicles and being able to pull them and some pretty complicated math work that gets done there as well. For non-injury accidents, it's very brief. You're probably going to spend the most amount of time just getting there, and really the law requires that people exchange information and not that a report is even accomplished. So oftentimes it's just getting there and the facilitating information. What we find sometimes is people may be uninsured, they may not have licenses, and then that requires a police service technician to have an officer come over because legally an officer has to be the one to be able to issue citations. They won't have the ability to do those things. But on injury accidents, they have the ability to get there and provide additional assistance. And it takes a couple of hours by the time you're mapping it and putting it in the software and getting everybody's information together and determining injuries and follow-up statements and witness statements. It can take a couple of hours.
okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm very pleased by the public affairs manager.
figured you might
communications
be.
Person. Thank you. I was like, as I was reading, I was doing my homework and reading through, government memos on a weekend. I was, my wife asked me, why did I have a goofy smile on my face? I was like, I got something done. Question about the PAL. So, turning this to a civilian versus sworn, this really won't decrease like the emphasis on sworn engagement with the youth involved in PAL.
No, it won't. We really feel over the last year, one of the things that we've done is we felt that, we want community engagement to really permeate the entirety of our culture and who we are throughout the entirety of the organization and having that partnership with our community. And so that won't change, but we have felt that we've been really spread throughout the entirety of the department in a variety of different divisions. And we want it to permeate the culture, but it really needs to be harnessed and focused within one specific division. And that way there's kind of a unity of command. There's a captain and a lieutenant and a sergeant, our professional staff, and there's an appropriate budget and evaluations for a bunch of different reasons. So we're seeking to really harness it and kind of bring it together to be a little bit more effective. And we actually, as we've seen that, we're going to see more officers, at the Police Activities League as we're increasing our school resource officers that, okay, when they get off at this certain amount of time, this is when the kids are actually coming in. We want, our officers and changing some hours to be able to be there to be more engagement. So we anticipate that it will allow for an increased amount of engagement with the officers, positively engaging with the kids, and less time with some of the officers doing some of the administrative work that a specialist in our professional staff is probably better equipped to do.
Yep.
And is just more appropriate that they do, so that way there's time for the officers to be able to, one, engage, but also look for ways where there things that like Chief talked about earlier, that only a police officer should be doing. And so we think that it will actually increase the amount of time by having somebody take care of some of the administrative work.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'd like to ask one.
Yep. Committee Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. So you talked about in at least two of these slots, you have current sergeants doing those tasks.
Yes, sir.
And you talked about returning them to the streets. Is that even possible?
Yes.
I mean, you guys get into administrative positions for a number of years. Are they even capable of going back out on the streets?
Yeah, so they're...
I'm sorry.
No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. And the interesting, for us in a real practical sense, is that there's a rotation that comes to these assignments. And so the public information officer, you see every year or two, you see a different person with in front of the microphone speaking and representing the chief. That's also one of the issues, quite frankly, that we have, is that there's a new person that comes in. We feel like generally if you want somebody speaking for the organization, it's probably going to at least be at the sergeant rank. So you have, as you can imagine, isn't always there's not a lot of people beating down the doors to go take that assignment. And so every couple of years, we're rotating somebody new through there, and we're training a new person to take that assignment. They'll promote, they'll go someplace else, and somebody new is coming back. We think that having a professional staff there will also provide us some long-term stability and learn to be able to communicate. We're a little nervous about it, to be transparent, because when you have a professional staff speaking for the department, oftentimes the questions that are coming really should come from the perspective of a police officer who's done some of the work. So we think that there's a real possibility we're going to have a learning curve, and we're going to lose some stuff on the front end of it. But if this person, if we have the patience to grow with this person, if they have the patience to grow with us, we think that it's a more effective way of doing it. So like the sergeant that's there, he was a patrol sergeant 3 months ago. He's going to go back to being a patrol sergeant, or whatever. There's 50 sergeants. There's a variety of different places they can go. The sergeant that's currently assigned out at the Police Activities League, it's pretty new out there. He was in training and logistics, and so even if it's not necessarily back to handling calls in the street, back to a forward-facing assignment that that we need sergeants at. And there's generally a fair amount of movement every 6 months or so. With this. There's always some sort of moves. It's a pretty large organization. So we do think in a real sense that they'll be able to go back to being a forward-facing position.
Let me ask one more question about the employee wellness. Is there a way that you're measuring that other than a lot of people go to it?
Sure.
Is there a way that you're measuring whether that's money well spent?
Yeah, it really is, and we're taking kind of a long-term approach to it. One of the things that we've looked at is we work pretty closely with our risk manager and our human resources director for the city, and we've got about 10 years worth of data as the amount of workers' compensation claims and issues that we've been facing. And so we're really looking at what can we invest in on the front end, and we're hoping to see some overall reductions. We've seen some things. There's an officer in the back that's wearing an exterior plate carrier. We think just how we distribute the weight a little bit differently is likely to reduce some injuries in years ahead. Knee, shoulder, back are the first top 3 injuries that we have year after year. Heart and stress are the other 2. So knee, shoulder, back, heart, stress, year after year, we can give you the numbers as to what that looks like. It's going to take some time, but as we've worked through the culture of what counseling looks like, what chaplains look like, what healthy communication stuff looks like, and moving away from some of these things, we're hoping that we're going to see a reduction in suicides, that we're going to see a reduction in industrial disability retirements, that we're going to see a reduction in stress claims, a reduction in heart claims, which are some of the most expensive claims that we see. So I don't know that by the time I come back to you next year, I'll be able to show you a reduction, but my hope is that when we see a reduction in those claims going forward, that we'll see a real benefit. I'm aware of other work that happens throughout our city and the difficulties that police departments and cities are having in retaining insurance and being insured as an agency, and you're seeing the cost of insurance go up year after year after year. And if we can be a department that that's healthier and shows a reduction in workers' compensation claims and things like that, it's a benefit to our people and making sure that they're living healthier lives. But we think there's a really strong benefit to our community and our taxpayers as well. So we think we'll see some reductions there. And as I'd like to go back a little bit too when we talk about some of our gun violence reduction strategy work. And these are real. It's nice to see a 30% reduction, but these are real lives that are being saved there. And we've spent some of our time doing a cost analysis as the cost of a shooting and the cost of a homicide, and being in the millions of dollars, in $1 million to $2 million range by the time you take into consideration medical costs and prosecution costs and defense costs and incarceration costs. And there's a couple $1 million per shooting whenever you're preventing a shooting that's happening. We're saving the lives and making our community safer, and we're saving the taxpayers' dollars as well. And so I think that's an important thing to highlight as well.
Thank you for adding that. I appreciate it. I have no further questions.
Committee Member Prince.
Yes. Since Chief Stratton brought it up, I'll reiterate when it comes to cost. I was just reviewing the actual salaries and benefits for the numerous positions here. And one in particular with the Public Affairs and Communications Manager, it's not broken out in regards to the actual salary. It's, I guess, the combination of salary and benefits. But we're looking at $158,000 for that particular position. Is that a going rate? And I'm sure, I would assume the HR is responsible for determining these salaries and the benefits, and also with a salary or benefit at that amount, the requirements from a degree standpoint or a background standpoint, experience standpoint, I think you will want to make sure that the best qualified individuals are in these positions. But how competitive is that salary, or is it It appears a little high, but again, I'm not in that particular field, so.
Thank you for the question. Yes, we worked very closely with Human Resources to establish the title and establish the scope of duties and the salary and benefits. A degree is required, experience in public relations, and all of those kinds of things are the minimum are among the minimum qualifications for the position. And so, when he talked about having a professional into this particular position, that's exactly what we're talking about: is an educated and experienced position. Those are among the minimum qualifications.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I ask you to expand just a little bit? Is that 158,000 a person price, or is that just
Say that.
the total cost of that person for the year?
Yes, that is salary and benefits. Yeah. Mhm.
Vice Chair Campbell?
What does it
Dad
cost?
stepped in to save me.
Oh, I'm sorry. What does it cost to hire a sergeant? The people the guy that's currently doing the job of the public affairs and communications manager, how much do we have to pay that person?
It's higher than that, but I don't know the exact number off the top. Does it you happen to know? It's I had to phone a friend, and I'm being told that it's in the 220 range when you're including salary and benefits.
So effectively what we're doing is we're getting the work of a police sergeant doing police sergeant work for $60,000 less than it would cost to pay a police sergeant.
Yes, sir. And back to some of the conversations you had a little earlier about how many officers are we going to need. This is kind of one of the areas that Chief is talking about when we go, are we going to need X number of officers? Well, if we can find these positions where traditionally we've not invested in professional staff, if we can find these positions there and return people to the street, that's part of the evaluation that we're constantly having as to what's the number of people that police officers that we actually do need. This helps contribute to those conversations. And there's a couple more that we can think of that, we've gradually done. If you recall, last year we came and asked for a command level position that is being tested for, that's returning a captain to doing other work, and some lieutenants that you invested in last year were doing the same thing. It really kind of led some of these ideas to go, what can we look at this year where we're doing that? So it kind of contributes towards that. But yes, we do think it's the same level of work that's essentially cheaper, and then shifting an officer to what an officer should be doing, which is police work.
Right. Well, what we have now is we have a person who's costing the city $220,000 to do the work that we can find somebody else to do for $160,000.
Yes, sir.
And then
That's our belief.
Gain a police sergeant in the process.
Yes, sir. That's our belief.
All right. All right.
Okay. From here, I will turn it over to my partner, Assistant Chief Jeremy Blakemore.
Thank you, Assistant Chief.
Good afternoon, committee, and thank you for your patience. I'll try and wrap things up as concisely as I can, covering a few more positions, civilian positions that are really more behind the scenes, and give you some more description on those. And the first one that we'll start out with is a fleet mechanic. So this one is actually being, we're proposing it, and I'll give you some more description on it, but just as a preface to that, it's actually something that falls within our Public Works and Fleet, Department and our Fleet Division specifically. For reference, if you're not familiar with it, the Fleet Division provides a specific police garage for us within our parking lot just across the street. So given the needs and size and scope of as you can imagine, of our public safety vehicles, our police vehicles, there's enough need, and that's been put in place to sustain and help continue with regular maintenance and service costs associated with that. Having said that, one specific area that has continued to grow over the last several years is our police motorcycle program, as we often refer to them as our motors. The motors, if you may remember, going back to even the late 2000s, we had at one point upwards of about 28 motorcycles that we had within our complement of, specifically for traffic enforcement related activities and collisions. That decreased over time, and ultimately we have been over the last several years building that back up. We recognize, as was mentioned earlier, the benefits associated with those, along with the prioritization of how we view and see the need for some of the traffic-related, again, collisions and enforcement-related aspects. So as we grow this complement back up, and again, it's at 17 right now with an additional 2 that are in training. There's actually another one that's getting deployed next month, so we'll already be increasing again. It is necessary for us to have the appropriate staff to service these vehicles, these motorcycles. Currently, we have had to go through the process of utilizing the local dealership. We use Harley-Davidson for all of our motorcycles. They're all Harley-Davidson bikes as a manufacturer, and they are serviced by the manufacturer. That provides its own set of challenges with us as it relates to downtime, service cost associated with it. To give you some perspective, on average, this fiscal year alone, already year to date, we have about 75 service calls that have been made, meaning a bike has had to be transported over physically to the dealership to get repaired, serviced, whatever that may look like, sometimes minor, sometimes major repairs. And sometimes those are out of service for extended periods of time. On average right now, they're about close to 6 days out of service just for those 75 calls that I just mentioned. So having that in mind, and not to mention the fact that it also takes 2 of our personnel out of service for a period of time to transport the vehicle over there, get a ride back, and then repeat the process when it's time to pick the vehicle up. So there are a number of factors that we have evaluated and have seen the need for capitalizing on an additional position, a mechanic position specifically. We've coordinated and communicated with Fleet. They are 100% on board as well, and this would be a position that would be, again, staffed here at the police garage so that they would service these motorcycles, as well as, if there is any downtime, any additional police vehicle needs. Again, it would pay for itself essentially in terms of the cost benefit that we would see with the ability to provide our get the repairs done on a faster pace, as well as keeping our officers in service for longer periods of time so they can actually concentrate on their enforcement activities. Second position is going to be, actually these are kind of tied together. I'll focus firstly on the fiscal and administrative specialist position. This position is one that, as the name insinuates, focuses on our accounting and our fiscal management within the police department. These are positions that we already currently have within our business office. However, we are requesting an additional one just based, again, on the growth and needs that we have recognized in our organization. As we continue to grow, we've had additional responsibilities related to these areas specifically, whether it's related to general fund matters, PSVS matters, grant funding, reimbursement from the state of California for training classes, a variety of needs that this particular person and specialist would be responsible for. It also does reduce some of the needs that would be specifically assigned to our training division, which is responsible for much of those things that I just mentioned as it relates to, again, training reimbursement needs, some of our fleet management, and other similar areas that just require a great deal of accounting and tracking for obvious reasons. So this particular person would be in addition to the current staff that we already have within the business office to supplement those needs. The correlation with the next one is the police secretary. We are asking for an additional secretary. We have a number of them throughout the organization, but there's one specific additional need that we have, again, that touches our training division specifically, and even more specifically within our stipulated judgment requirements. As Chief mentioned earlier, as well as City Manager Clegg, the stipulated judgment does or has over the years increased some of the burdens that we have as it relates to training and how we track those things and our accountability practices. So the secretary position specifically is a civilian staff position that would help us with coordinating those positions. To give you some kind of context on what that looks like, again, with an organization our size of over 700 staff between sworn and civilian staff, and many of those positions, our sworn staff specifically and our dispatchers specifically, have mandates that require us to stay on top of training, certain levels of training, on either an annual basis or a biannual basis. As an example, we have, for our sworn staff, the bare minimum required by the state is 18 hours of training in various areas, whether it's use of force, communication skills, those types of areas that are required every per officer every 2 years. So that's just the bare minimum. We do obviously well above that and exceed in many other areas, but all of that requires someone that can be responsible for helping us schedule, track, maintain, report, communicate back with the state of California or our Bakersfield monitoring team, those types of things to really provide the necessary oversight and management related to those requirements. So this position, that secretary position, would be specifically responsible to help fulfill that, and again, relieve a lot of that burden. I won't say it'll be a replacement directly for like a sergeant position or a sworn staff, but it absolutely will relieve a lot of the burden that's currently carried by those positions. And the final one that we're proposing is a crime analyst position. Again, we have several crime analysts. I believe we have currently 5 crime analysts within the organization, and we are proposing another one. However, this one is in conjunction with our CIP request related to a real-time information center. You heard, again, City Manager Clegg mention briefly what this is, but I'll provide a little bit more context for you. In fact, I'm going to go to the next slide, which may even be a little bit better for this process. The a real-time information center, sometimes depending on nomenclature in other agencies, you may hear it referred to as a real-time crime center or other similar terms. But in essence, as was previously referenced, it is the ability for us to funnel a lot of our intelligence-led policing platforms into one single location so that we can optimize our resources and better deploy our resources. In essence, if you think about many of the things that we already currently have in place and have for years and continue to expand, we have license plate reader systems. We have the gunshot detection system, ShotSpotter, that you heard Chief mention earlier. We have city surveillance cameras in various areas. So those are just some examples of some of the things that ultimately are then, those are all independent systems essentially through separate vendors more often than not. And then this would be provide an opportunity for us to, again, funnel those into a single location with, again, that crime analyst that I'll refer back to that will staff and manage that particular area as at least one of the members of the staffing within that location. That will help us analyze these things in real time so that when we're receiving calls for service, whether that be the robberies and gang-related violence, traffic collisions, any of those things that we've previously talked about that you heard Chief discuss, that we can take the information and apply all of our other intelligence-led platforms to try and maximize what our best strategy is to deploy and get the information to our officers on the front line as quickly and as fast as possible. That is in essence what the intent and purpose and mission of a real-time information center is. And you may have even seen some of them, like the picture on TV. You may have the video walls and people working hard to just monitor cameras and relay that information. So that's exactly what that is, and that's where the crime analyst would come into play as well in the sense of the staff that would go into it. It would not necessarily be, not to get too far into the weeds, it would not necessarily be something that would be 24/7 staffing at this point. Obviously, we can't do that with one single person, but we would have our own internal strategies to obviously utilize this, at least in its infancy, within our primary hours that are needed, highest call volumes and those types of things. And we can supplement it as needed with other crime analysts and overtime as needed. That really concludes, I guess, the summary of what the Real-Time Crime Center is and what the purpose behind it is. You can see some numbers there as it relates to some of the initial cost as well as what some of the recurring costs are, and we can take some additional questions.
So I'm assuming FlockOS is an operating system?
I'm sorry, yes, I could have elaborated on that. So one of the softwares that does come along with this is the Flock operating system. Mm-hmm. Flock is actually the manufacturer of our license plate readers that we have as well. We have roughly 50 of those already deployed and looking to deploy another 30 through some grant funding that we already have. So again, we have the intelligence platforms already in place. Of course, they will grow over time, but having the RTIC provides us an opportunity to really funnel all this information into one spot, maximize it, capitalize on it so that we can deploy our resources most efficiently and really minimize and deter crime as much as possible as well.
And then I see cameras on there. Is that for additional license plate readers, or is that just general surveillance?
Those would not be for additional license plate readers.
Okay.
Those are general surveillance cameras.
Okay. Any other questions from my colleagues? Yes. Committee Member Dewey.
On the, thank you for your report, but on the fleet mechanic, is he solely or she solely tasked with overseeing the Harley Davidsons, or is this other duties besides that?
The predominant use, as I would see it, and we do have some of our fleet staff here that may be able to add to it, but they will predominantly focus on the Harley Davidsons. There's enough workload that we see there that will occupy their time. The reality is, though, is if there is some downtime, they will still be utilized to service our police vehicles, our four-wheeled vehicles.
Okay, is there any special certificates or training that this individual will need on top of, in order to service these motorcycles?
Probably, the position itself, and again, I'll invite maybe Mike Vogel, our fleet superintendent over here, if he wants to add or correct me if I'm wrong, but the position itself is a position that is a generalist enough in the sense that they are capable of performing work on any city vehicle. So what the specific training goes into in terms of the mechanical operation, I'm sure there is additional. I don't know what it is offhand. Again, would defer if Fleet wants to add any more specifics in terms of what the training may look like.
Well, I have an additional question. With these motorcycles that the city is purchasing, don't they come with a standard, or do they come with any kind of warranty as far as mechanical difficulty, and that would designate the dealer that would have to take care of that, correct? So the city couldn't perform that task. So I'm kind of trying to get a gist of what this person's task is. Is it like oil changes, or is it, basically that's it? So you got 20 bikes, and how often do you have to change the oil?
Come on up, Mike.
I mean, I've seen 84,000, was it a significant amount of money for $87,000 a year for oil changes?
Warranty work would be done at the dealer.
Yeah,
And then
warranty
there's
work.
more than oil and,
Right.
Yeah, so
on those.
even with a brand-new police bike, there are sometimes repairs that are not under warranty. Could be tire repair, could be, filter, could be where they brushed up against something. So the warranty stuff, do we bring back to the dealer whenever we can? The answer is yes. But when you take the 17 bikes, it's probably going to take more than one person actually during a year to perform all the maintenance and repair. Do they require training? The answer is yes. And we would help them with whatever training they need. Our technicians are required to work on a majority of equipment that the city owns. We probably have 150 different nameplates. So would they be busy on the bikes plus some of the car repairs? The answer is yes.
Okay, thank you. And I just one other comment. It's just like, so are we using 2 sworn officers to transport motorcycles back and forth to the dealership?
That is correct, yes. And it's
Okay.
again, because they have their own motorcycle endorsements, they've received the training, they're the only ones that can
So we
operate
can't-
and transport the bikes over there.
We can't trailer them or anything, huh? Just
I'm
curious.
sorry.
Never mind. Thank you.
Just a quick question as well, in regards to the motorcycles when they are actually being worked on. You mentioned earlier, sometimes it could take anywhere from 6 days or beyond. So what happens to those officers while those motorcycles are being repaired in regards to their line of work?
Sure. Great question. It would really depend. If there is another bike that's available, perhaps that another officer may be on vacation or something along those lines. If we have another motor available, then we can replace it with that. We do have additional fleet vehicles that are more of the shared vehicles, essentially. So they would have to get into essentially a 4-wheeled police vehicle and perform their duties as best they could, which does limit what their capacity is in the purpose of the entire motor unit.
Vice Chair Campbell.
Do you have any data on the average cost to the department for those 75 instances of transporting the motorcycle for repair?
It was approximately $52,000. Again, that's this current fiscal year, and we're not over it yet. So.
That's $52,000 this fiscal year for repairs that we've paid outside contractors.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Nothing else, Chief?
Thank you, sir. All right, the last slide is just a summary of everything that we've discussed, and I think it's already in your packet, but just puts it all in one place. And with that, we'll be available for any other questions.
Okay. Committee Member Coleman.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. Chief, maybe I should have asked Assistant Chief Blakemore on this, but Some of
If
these.
it's hard, yes.
I'm sorry?
If it's a hard one, yes.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Actually, my question is, when we have these opportunities for non-sworn officers, is there any effort to look within the city employee staff currently? Not all departments can be growing at the same time. Are we looking for opportunities where we can shift somebody over from one, so let's say Parks Department, for example, into a secretary in the police department? I just want to know if there's any effort to do that kind of thing before we physically add positions in the city.
Thank you for the question, and I'm trying to think through in a formal way. I would say probably not. We do communicate often because as positions become available, if they're promotional, then people will look, employees will look across the different city departments. But I'm not aware of and haven't been involved in really a coordinated conversation between departments that are associated with the police department. Maybe there is something else beyond that.
Yeah, I'll just add 3 quick thoughts. One, actually, when we look at some of our internal performance auditing that these are PSVS funds have gone towards a contract with Moss Adams to look at reviews. Sometimes we look at things citywide, like right now we're looking at the use of space, like how we're using space across the city, and because we have office challenges as well, and we're looking for who can give a little more space to other folks. That's one very concrete example. But also we've had some conversations about that there are certain duties that can be pooled and there are other duties that can't really be pooled. And so we've been considering whether or not we do a citywide analysis on analyst level support or customer service level support or planner level support. There may be opportunities to pool those, and you can actually, as the saying goes, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We look for some of those opportunities. On some of the case-by-case, though, there's a couple of examples that even for policing where we've looked at, which is technology support. We have looked at, hey, can the technology services department take on some duties that might have been some of the responsibilities of policing, but then also sometimes it's the dedicated staff who have that level of expertise may be housed either centralized or in the department. So on a case-by-case basis, we have looked at a couple areas like general services and technology services where we can share some of those responsibilities, but many of the other functions are a little harder to pool or share. But on a case-by-case basis, we are looking at it. If we were to do bigger than a case-by-case, it would probably be something we'd ask a performance auditor to do an evaluation for us.
Okay. And I don't know, this is more in the nature of opining, but I wanted to thank you, Chief, for coming and making this presentation, and I'm always very impressed with you and your command staff there. We're not, the stormtroopers that the police department's been saddled with. Your command staff and yourself are very well educated. You're very good communicators. You've analyzed all the aspects of this. You presented it in a great manner, and so I just wanted to thank you for that and your staff.
Well, I appreciate that. We do have incredible men and women, so I am equally grateful for them.
Committee Member Prince?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Ditto with Representative Coleman in his comments as well about you and your staff. This isn't a question, but I read this morning, I think it was last night, in regards to a few other departments in other cities in the state of California are now trying electric vehicles, both their vehicles and I'm assuming bikes as well. But one of the reasons why was due to the fact that the maintenance purportedly was supposed to be a lot less. So I don't know if that's something that has or will be ever a consideration, but I'm just sharing information on what I read about other departments and what they're considering doing here in the state.
Yeah, thank you for that.
I just think a mall cop.
I'll take a first cut at that, and Mr. Vogel could add to if he wants to, but just at a high level, just so that this committee is aware, there are already state laws in place that mandate that municipal fleets transition any new vehicle purchases up to a certain percentage have to be electric vehicles, and that includes fire trucks, garbage trucks, and other specialized vehicles. And so we're in the planning stages right now of how that's going to impact us, how that's going to hit us. We have looked at some of the data. We do acknowledge that some of the maintenance costs do appear to be lower, but the upfront costs we're looking at are 2.5 times higher to purchase an electric vehicle than a typical traditional vehicle today. So even though the maintenance costs may be lower, the purchasing costs are higher. We have 28 new vehicles. Is it 28 total new, Mike, or just 28 that will be subject to the 50% rule this coming year? Go ahead and come on up, Mike.
Join the fun.
So we have specific numbers in our fleet that we know we're going to have to purchase next year, and as of next year, it's a 50% requirement for EV vehicles, and in the coming years, it will be up to a 100% requirement. So, by the way, before Mr. Vogel gives you some of those numbers, we're fighting with our lobbyists in the legislature to delay at a minimum the timing or roll back some of that legislation. Again, we're not, completely philosophically opposed, but the infrastructure's not there. The costs are much higher. It is going to be a big cost burden to the taxpayer at this point to make this transition. And again, we're concerned that we don't have the ability to charge and to maintain the transitions coming too fast. But do you want to give a few numbers?
Yeah, so the current list for the upcoming year that we were budgeted for, it's about 28 vehicles. But we have a number of vehicles that we haven't been able to purchase over the last years due to the issues with the manufacturers, so it's actually 63. The majority of the vehicles for the police department are not under that mandate because it's 8,500 and 1 GVW and above, which are larger vehicles actually. But we are looking at electrification of part of the police fleet when we can do it. We've actually had some discussions. We do have some hybrid vehicles for them. This last budget year, we bought a few of those, so we are heading in that direction.
Committee Member Matland.
I can kind of state to that
This is your world,
quite
right?
a bit. Once you get into those larger vehicles, the technology is not there. With our heat, you're not going to get the mileage. So delay, because they do not run, period. Some of the vehicles, the hybrids, everything should be hybrid, but your larger trash trucks and stuff like that, we work on them. But it's very difficult with the larger vehicles, so.
Anything else for the chief?
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we will transition into parks, and I feel like with the hour that remains to us should be a good amount of time to go over some of the accomplishments and how we have put to use the Measure N money. And then again, a fairly short list of projects there,
Yep.
but we'll turn it over to Director Anthony.
Good afternoon.
Chairman Ortiz, and also committee members. For the record, Rick Anthony. Definitely have a very brief presentation today, but wanted to, because it was brought up a little bit earlier, just to give a brief update on the Ranger program. That program has not only been hugely successful, but it's actually fast becoming the model for not just our jurisdiction, but for surrounding jurisdictions as well. Just from a casual observation, we don't have the entrenched encampments that we used to have. You can visibly see the park is cleaner and the park is safer. And we certainly have Billy Owens here, who's our ranger manager, can speak to some of the data. And a lot of the data does relate to the fact that we've alleviated a lot of pressure from the police department. They no longer even respond to our park issues unless it rises to the occasion of a serious crime. So the program is very successful. I believe he does have a presentation plan for safety committee, so if you are available, certainly happy for you to join us and get more details about that program. Want to thank you for the support for that, as well as the continued support for all of the things that we do here in Rec and Parks. I do have a tremendous staff. A lot of them are present today that are committed. We have our 3 of the community priorities, 5, 12, and 13, that this presentation will be focused on. 3 requests, as Christian alluded to, park amenities and renovations. You'll see a lot of those improvements in these pictures today. That has been a huge asset, and it really gives us the ability to make low-hanging fruit improvements, not just in certain parks, but actually citywide. And every ward, every park is getting some level of improvements. Jastrow Park stage improvements. Jastrow has been an ongoing project, so we hope that this could be kind of the final phase of renovating and reimagining that total park. And then also our MLK park renovation that does include a community center as well, and certainly happy to speak to the progress of that project as well. Some of our accomplishments here, again, a lot of this is from the PARI account, but this gives you just a varying idea of all the different things that we're able to do with that flexibility. And here's some of the accomplishments from this prior year. Actually able to open up a very small pocket park with support from ECD in the East Bakersfield area. One of the other things that we've been successful, especially having the rangers on board, is that we've had areas in our park system that have a issue with chronic vandalism and encampments. And so we're able to kind of fortify some of these areas. And a good example is Sister City's Garden Fence project. Now that we have the ability to open and close them during public hours and also for reservation purposes, we're able to really mitigate some of the systemic issues that that area has encountered over the years. And this project literally, I believe, got done this past week. Again, more example of shade structures. Shade is big. I believe probably in the last 2 or 3 years, we've probably spent more on shade than we've had probably in the previous 10 or 20, but it's much needed, as you well know, with the weather conditions here and the fact that many of our playgrounds were unshaded. So that will be an ongoing effort by the department. Again, another varying aspects of many amenities that we're doing. And that is the end of my presentation. You're welcome. Any questions?
I'm standing in for the chair, so I'll recognize Mr. Coman.
Thank you. So I don't feel like there's a lot of detail with the $3 million that you're asking for the MLK Park. I think that as a whole, I think the entire community can agree that there's been some neglect in MLK Park over the last decades. And so there's some improvements necessary. So what specifically is this $3 million going to in MLK Park?
So the city has already contributed to this project. We are in a kind of a concept design phase that will get us to about 30%. What this $3 million will do will help us in terms of matching grants. So I have a list of probably 7 grants that are available, both state and federal grants. A lot of them do require matches. A lot of them do require to see those matches up front. So what this does, and I am thankful for the support from the city manager as well as the committee and the council, they need to show that this funding is available before they would award us certain grants. There's a possibility we may need more, but again, we are casting a very wide net to not put the pressure on all the pressure on this city to be able to fund this project.
Let me ask you a more expanded question.
Sure.
The city manager may need to interject on this. Did you propose to the city council a $100 million bond initiative for work at the MLK Park? And what is the status
No,
of that?
I did not. And Christian can probably give you
All
more
right.
details, but that's not true.
Yeah, happy to talk through that one. And I was going to also just back up a little bit to say, what is the grant match trying to fund? So it is a renovation of the park. It is also, though, a complete rebuild of the community center that is currently at the park. It is well beyond its useful life. And we looked at different options, including, minimal spruce up to renovation. And even the renovation costs are probably the same cost and you don't get the same value. And so this is for a new community center. Just to give a little more context as well, that corner lot that was the former, I'm forgetting now, the Veterans Hall was purchased by the city from the county, and so we own the entire block of that area. And that will be part of the footprint of this brand new park as well as community center. It's probably worth noting also, parks right now, as we've gone out to bid, it's about $1 million per acre to build a new park. That's irrigation, landscaping, and of course some of the facilities, amenities. You've got sports courts or sports fields of grass. And this is one of those large 10-acre sites, but it also has a pool, and so aquatics is another element as well. And in the conceptual designs that have been presented to the council, and the council's asked us to, as staff, to move forward in finalizing those designs, it includes still a pool. It will not be upgraded to the level of like a McMurtry pool, but it would add some slides and a few little amenities to make it beyond what is there currently for the pool today. We'll have new sports courts. There would be a little bit of a change in the emphasis of the green areas throughout. There will be very nice walking paths and gathering areas, but also a little less of the emphasis on sort of the baseball diamond, of fields of yesteryear, and a little more of a multi-use green that can be for multiple sports. And then a community garden as well. So it's a very extensive project. Probably the biggest cost item is the community center itself. And then collectively, I think, the aquatics and the rest of the park footprint are kind of, number 2 and number 3 in the what drives the cost. And so we've acknowledged to the council that we do not, excuse me, so it was about an $85 million estimate on the costs for the full project in total. And so we've been transparent to the council that we don't have $85 million in the bank, and that we have allocated some PSVS, we've allocated some ARPA, and we're going to go big after grants, and we're going to go big after philanthropy. You don't do a signature regional park project like this from one single funding source. But we have contemplated, are there other funding mechanisms that we need to consider? And there's also CDBG loans, there's other borrowing. You didn't ask this question, but I'm going to anticipate it a little bit because there's other numbers out there where we've done now a long-term master planning for parks. And if we delivered to the community the undeveloped parks that we've already committed to, as well as the ones that we anticipate we're going to need to build, and also grew some of the amenities that the communities asked for, and extensive outreach through that parks master planning process. We've had lots of town halls and meetings and surveys and focus groups, and folks are asking for some additional amenities. They want to see more parks. They want to see parks in different places. They want to see some of the amenities in parks change. There's also been requests for more recreation programs. It's not really a space that we've functioned in to much degree. So if you look at again, what would be, I would consider a very aspirational list of things that the community would like to see. It represents hundreds of millions of dollars. It's, the number, Rick, is
Over 300 million.
yeah, over $300 million. Now, we all know we don't have the resources to do all of that, but it at least creates a vision to the future of what are the types of things the community would like to see, and then you have to prioritize. You have to prioritize, and you have to live within your means. And so we recognize that not only in some of the projects that we probably do need to deliver in the next 5 to 10 years, at a minimum of those neighborhoods that have been built out that don't have their parks finished, we need to go finish those parks. And some of our other priorities, around the Kern River Parkway, as well as, again, like signature projects that we've been talking about and committed to, like this one at MLK. The conversation has come up is, does it make sense for a certain level of delivering community projects to do some borrowing against future revenues? But anytime you consider that, it has to be done with a lot of discretion and a lot of thoughtfulness. The city has not issued general obligation debt historically. Most cities do, but that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. It is one way to get at community needs if planned well financially, but there's been no specific proposal to the council about a number to borrow or how to borrow. It's just been a conversation of, should we start doing our homework and thinking about that? And I'll, again, you didn't ask me to answer this, but I'll just give my take, is that with a unclear economy and significant needs in many areas, it would be wise to be very cautious in that. But we do also see that we're spending, and this is not a commentary on the specific list that's in front of the committee today, but if you just look at the PSVS spend on parks over the last 4 years, we've been spending $5+ million every year on parks. And so, one could argue that it's reasonable to capitalize a certain, portion of your revenues to go and make that delivery sooner than later, and also the time value of money. There's value to all of that, but that analysis and homework hasn't been presented yet to this committee or to the council.
And is that something that the council can do on their own, or would that need to go to the pipe list for a vote?
Yeah, great question. There's different ways that you can borrow, of course. You can do a ballot measure that would raise specific tax revenues to pay a specific bond. That's what I think most voters are familiar with. But there are actually other tiers where the city council can take independent action of the ballot to spend against their own future revenues. So that's just, basically it's a city taking out a loan through the bond market. And there's actually other, even lower tiers where there are sort of consortia that lend to municipalities to finance projects. That is even less intensive than trying to, go and sell bonds to the bond market. And then, as I mentioned, there's, things like Section 108 loans through CDBG funds. There's the federal entitlement funds can also be, allocated through council discretionary action to projects like this. So there are some actions that council can take at their own discretion that are different than just doing a bond measure to the ballot.
Thank you for answering the question. This kind of gets back to the point that some committee members have made over the last couple of years about the percentage of Measure N money that's committed to recurring expenses. The city's had the opportunity to enjoy having $25 million to be able to upgrade their enterprise system and things of that nature. And when you start to whittle away at that Measure N money for reoccurring costs, that's just less money that you have for these large-scale projects. And I really would encourage that, you know, and I'm not saying that an $80 million expense at MLK is not warranted. We're not even discuss that. There's you know, but it wouldn't all occur in 1 year anyway. So is there a way that we can structure, you know, using existing resources or existing revenue streams that was really, although the Measure N was really emphasized more on police services and fire and all that, it was mentioned directly in there, parks. And so, you know, we have this revenue stream and really should look to, you know, making sure that we're maximizing that before we try to incur any more debt or certainly any more tax obligation. It's not up to me, obviously, to say, you know, but I know it was a hard sell with this Measure N barely passed, you know, to get another bond initiative through it. I don't know, you know. Anyway, that's just, and I didn't mean to, if I said that improperly to you, I didn't really mean that. I was just trying to get to that subject of whether or not there was a request for, I wasn't accusing you. I might have said it more accusatorial, but I didn't really intend it that way. But I did want to get to it because I had been told that there was that proposal. So, and I don't have any more questions about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Committee Member Coleman. I had a similar question, so you stole my thunder, and that was a very quick presentation, by the way. So, so I guess, you know, I don't want to belabor this point, but I think it's very, very important what this exchange that we kind of have stumbled into around this concept of basically utilizing PSVS funds for debt service, both in terms of the specific point around MLK, but in general when it comes to the funds. Again, I'm very mindful and I acknowledge that, you know, really the authority on how to spend PSVS dollars, since it is a general tax and therefore gets swept into the general fund, is the discretion of the council. Our role is advisory. I think when you start talking about utilizing, and from my perspective as well, I've tried to be extremely generous, both in terms of as a stakeholder and as a committee member, in terms of analyzing some of these expenditures and saying, okay, yes, I can see even in, you know, other ways, you know, how this fits within the priorities of the measure. I think when you start to talk about utilizing PSVS dollars for debt service of any type, that becomes incredibly fuzzy. To be able to say and to be able for all of us, and as our duty, our one duty, regardless of our advisory component on the city's budget, our one duty is to say every year that the funds were expended in agreement with the measure priorities. And when you start to utilize PSVS dollars for debt service, I think again that gets fuzzy, and that complicates, I think, our ability to say that like very, very forcefully. But again, I acknowledge that this is, you know, the City Council's purview as the appropriators. I would just request that in this year and in future years, if that is a topic of conversation, or if there's even the thought about using one of these allocations towards something like debt service, that is very clearly called out. And I'm not saying that that didn't happen this year. I mean, I firmly believe that, I mean, I don't know how far you're going to get with $3 million worth of debt service, but I truly support going after the grants. I think that there's, you know, a lot of opportunity out there, regardless of, even at the state level, regardless of the deficit in the state budget. And I, like Committee Member Coleman, truly see the need out of MLK and think that it could be really, you know, a marquee project for the city and for that community. But again, just that policy point around debt service, I think, is really important.
Yeah, let me just take the opportunity to, one, say yes, duly noted, you know, for the record, and I think that's reasonable. My interpretation of, you know, approval would be that this committee would have to say, is that consistent, you know, with the priorities? But also just to confirm, yeah, that there's no debt to be serviced with this allocation.
Hi. So the 3 million, what was spent last year, and then I guess over the 5 years?
Was
On that specific
to
part?
MLK?
Yeah,
Currently,
ballpark.
Yeah, ballpark right now, we've got about 8 million committed, and they're ongoing expenditures as the MIG, which is our project consultant, draws down from that fund.
So then you're getting a matching 3?
Yeah, the $3 million will probably more specifically go to make sure that we qualify for certain
For
grants
matching.
that require that we have that allocation identified.
And then a 10-acre park, that's a big park. You bought the veterans, how much property was,
It's about 2.6 acres, approximately. And I would say that we got it at a significantly reduced cost. They put deed restrictions that it could only be used for recreation, but I believe the number they were throwing around in terms of their original appraisal was close to 600,000, and we got it for about 200,000.
oh, okay. Are you tearing that facility down?
It's already torn down.
Oop,
It's flat.
gone. So the pool and fence that we talked about last year, was the pool already resurfaced and done and the fence done?
I believe that was probably Jefferson. MLK, we didn't have a capital project for the pool.
Oh,
We've
okay.
kind of stalled all improvements in MLK so we could focus on the larger.
And then you're tearing down the rec center and rebuilding?
At some point, we're right now the discussion is trying to keep our program and services ongoing as long as we can. We've actually identified most of the county property to be the site of the new community center. So the hopes is that we can phase it out, begin construction without losing those services for the community until we have to.
How large is the rec center?
Great question. Off the top of my head, I think Christian may know better than I. He has a better memory. He's a lot younger than I am, but I believe it's over 70,000 square feet right now.
Okay, big. Yeah, and you're going to, the whole park?
Everything.
10 acres?
Holy. 16 acres.
Okay.
It will, the definition of a community park, I think even though it's smaller, this is going to be a regional park probably on the same lines in terms of amenities as what we have at Riverwalk. There's an amphitheater that's proposed, areas for farmers market. So it really will be something on the east side of town that all the city residents will be able to enjoy with a lot of different amenities included.
That's a big park. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Committee Member Rojas Mora.
Hello.
Hello.
And again, it's my understanding that, I mean, this $3 million is to leverage grant funding and other resources because you have a committee that is working on or actively engaged in what the final footprint will look like.
The stakeholders committee have met for over a year and a half. So what we have now is a direct action from those wishes. And that's why there's so many amenities, because the committee that desired that, the communities has. I do have a one sheet, if anyone's interested, that shows some of the grants that we're going for. So hopefully it'll give you a better perspective of why, and the different grants from both state and federal, and I'm happy to pass that out. But it just gives you an idea of, and this does not include any ask for private, as Christian mentioned, private funders, as well as nonprofits who want to advocate for funding for the park. So I'll go ahead and give this to Julie for you.
Any other questions? I just have one, and I was going to ask, is any part of this park upgrade in the TCC, the Transformative Climate Communities proposal that's been sent up to the state?
We had a small piece, and it was mainly focused on tree planting. Unfortunately, the community center did not qualify. However, and I believe that has since been removed because we had to make some reductions for the overall grant. However, the larger EPA grant does have a significant ask for the community center, as well as, I believe, some green spaces.
Committee Member Maitland.
I forgot. Oh, is there any way to generate income from, well,
We do have a fee structure. By no means is it a large rate of return, but there is discussion about obviously a membership for the community center. We collect rental fees for the community center as well as any programs that, but the cost, mainly because of the demographics of that neighborhood, we've tried to keep the cost down for that community.
I would just add a couple thoughts too, if I may. It's very, it is very atypical for a community to raise, significant revenues from sort of their program fee-based programs. And that's just the nature, again, of doing, community-oriented services. But I will say we were getting pretty creative about this site, about what were some of our options. And so, not to go too far down a rabbit hole, but we talked about, do we create leasable spaces that can generate revenue, that can offset some of these costs? There's a long conversation with the community, and there is a desire for additional community assets in that neighborhood because there's not as many services and shops in that neighborhood. But the community voice through the surveys and the focus groups and the advisory group was pretty strong that they weren't looking for a shopping center on the park. They wanted a park on the park and a community center on the park. However, we are looking at also other sites that are adjacent that could be redevelopment sites that could create, the city could create some modest incentives that then create that synergy and amenities people are looking for, and could that then have benefits back to the park and park costs possibly. Also, we have explored, even though we're not looking to again create sort of like a retail center there on the site, there may be some smaller options that could be revenue generators. And then also we're hoping, and I'm not trying to get too far ahead of Mr. Anthony, or some of our other conversations, we're hoping to look for partners that might want to have a presence, an ongoing presence there, whether that's education or academia or healthcare, as just some potential brainstorm ideas, not to pin it down too much, but we want to ask folks if they would like to house some of their programs at this community center, so that there's more offerings for the community, but then also that generates a little bit of revenue on our side to help offset some of those same construction and ongoing costs as well.
Yeah, well, sometimes the cost to get a few dollars costs more than with the management of it.
Sometimes.
Be careful.
Yeah, sometimes.
But the other, because I live on the east side, and you're wanting to put, as far as safety and how much policing, I mean, that's where the shot thing, I think it's over in this area. But I live over here, and having events, I'm just saying, it is what it is. I don't live at 7 Okies, so I gotta watch out when I gas up my car sometimes.
Yeah, I would
just the future, the protection, the cost there.
I'm sorry, yeah. Well, I would say, you're talking about the safety issues of the park itself. I believe that we have made significant progress there, and mainly because of the presence of the rangers. You're still going to have those things that come up, and we'll address them. I do believe and feel very confidently that once that park is in construction phase, that some of that historical and chronic use possibly will go away, and once the new park is built, and we certainly will make sure that we're very diligent about protecting those new assets there. But there's security cameras are going to be a part of it. We do plan to actually have a ranger satellite station inside of the community center, so there will be a ranger that will be stationed there on a regular basis while our other rangers are patrolling various parks. So, and just to touch a little bit on what Christian said, and it's not included on the one sheet that I gave you, but we have discussions with Bakersfield City School District, who's very interested in partnering with us. They are having their own budget challenges, so we don't know what that looks like as of yet. We've gotten commitments from Kern Health System to support. We've talked to Dignity Health, and we've talked to Kaiser. And all of them are in some varying phases of support. Again, it will become clearer and clearer as we move forward, but just wanted to let this committee know that those conversations are also taking place as well.
Drive a high price for those naming rights, Mr. Anthony. Okay, I've got Committee Member Coleman, who has has a couple questions, and then Committee Member Prince. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks for exploring those other options too. That philanthropic part is very, very important. We can look for Ms. Wart to put up a bunch of money. That'd be great. So, the reason I got sidetracked, but I get back on it. It sounds like great. It sounds like you got on top of that. But I wanted to talk about our other parks in general. Yeah, I know that we went through over the last 24 months or so, putting in gates and that kind of thing on the parks. But when I drive by them after hours or at night, I don't see them even being closed. So is there some kind of schedule by which the park rangers go around and clear the parks and then close those gates, or what's the process?
Yeah, the gates are being closed. Now, our park hours are 10 o'clock at night, so there's a possibility you may pass by prior to that time, but they will sweep the parks. Obviously, they can't be at every park every time. Right? One thing that Mr. Owens has been able to do is extend those park hours. So now that we have, the patrol hours, so now where the rangers were getting off at 12 midnight, it's now 3 a.m. in the morning. So we have more of a presence, to be able to kind of sweep those parks and to patrol them even after we close the gates, as well as he's extended patrols through the weekend. So where the people are is where we have more of the rangers providing that service for them as well.
And is there any plan to upgrade the plantings and material? I go in the parks and they're nice open spaces, but you know, when you compare them to other parks in other communities, they just don't have the punch. The grasses always seem to be, not to the grade that I'm familiar with. Let's put it that way. Is there any thought about, do you guys have a landscape architect that works on your staff that helps with those kind of things, or what?
We do, and I know that's probably more of a comprehensive discussion about what we would like to see in the future, but if I can just take a few minutes to kind of give you a little bit of the makeup of our department. So we handle all of the streetscapes for the city. And I would probably say 80% of our staff time is dedicated and committed to maintaining those streetscapes. So we are working on a very both tight budget and tight resources. And so most of the time it is the bare minimum. However, through a lot of our efforts in terms of our turf replacement program, which not only reduces the water that we use, but also the maintenance required, there's a thought that once we really get a lot of those streetscape obligations kind of off our plate and being able to maintain, then certainly we want to focus on making sure that our parks are improving, and that could be certainly is one of the aspects of how we can beautify the parks. But as of right now, that's still going to be something that we're chasing, but in the long term, we do have a plan, and it's being discussed.
Thank you, sir. I have no further questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your presentation also. I'm assuming my request for the 9-hole par 3 corporate golf course at MLK Park was not selected. Given that, on a more serious note, following up with Mr. Coleman, actually, I know a few cities that I've lived before, a lot of the parks that had a lot of high activity were actually fenced off, where there were limited entrances and exits to the parks. I know a lot of our parks here are pretty open, considered to be open parks. Even from a standpoint of a park ranger or managing or securing, has there ever been any consideration of possibly decorative fencing to go around the parks that would not allow as much open traffic in and out of the parks?
I think that we're doing a little bit of that hardening now. I mean, obviously, it hasn't been something that we say across the board, this is what we want. But in areas where there is a significant issue, and a couple examples, Saunders, we had that chain link fence that was constantly being vandalized, broken into, a lot of damage to our inside sports complex there. Well, we put up a block wall now, and it is helping quite a bit with keeping those issues at bay, but also securing the parks. And we close the gate now, we know that it's very difficult for people to come into it. Sister Cities is another example of us putting, so I think where appropriate, I'm not sure that we want to be a city with all gated parks, but I do believe that it does serve a purpose in certain instances.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony.
All right, thank you.
All right. We will return to you, Mr. Clegg.
All right, that wraps us up for today. Next week, again, we will have Public Works to walk through, again, some of the work that they've done, as well as what those streets allocations represent. I was giving some thought to the inquiry about homelessness earlier.
Yeah.
If there's a desire to dig into that topic a little bit more, I think there's time next meeting, and we'll work on some materials to also present on that topic, because I think, again, those are kind of the four big topics. We've covered three, but not the fourth, so fair consideration. So we'll be prepared to speak a little more to homelessness, and then streets, and then the ongoing deliberation and close out next week.
Can I just return to my colleagues real quick? I mean, I think that there may be, I don't know if you want action today on any of these things.
No,
but-
none.
Okay. I didn't know if you wanted, okay.
No, the intent was to.
Just
you know,
information.
Just information.
Okay.
And again, we didn't want to ask for action unless there had been at least, a couple of weeks of time to think, ask questions offline, and then ask questions in the meetings.
Okay. Awesome.
Our intent is to put the slate up at the end of next week's meeting after we've looked at it all and discussed it all.
Great. All right, Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Commissioners' comments?
Well, I think we've said it all, but is there anything else we have not said? All right. Oh, Vice Chair
The only
Campbell.
thing I would add is that if you could, when you produce the slate of things for us to consider, if we could separate it out by department, that would be helpful to me.
Yep, that's our plan. Thank you.
All right. All right. And do we need an motion to adjourn? Okay, we're adjourned.